how much of that is what if, and how much of that is knowledge that you've attained from your blue friends?
Depressions formed in the ice sheets, and they filled up with water. And it is really strange when you think about how many of the really solid ancient mythologies suggest that the way to get to the other world is not off of the earth, but in toward the center of it. (10,500 BC).
Atlantis.
Depressions formed in the ice sheets, and they filled up with water. Oh no, we don't want all the personal information about your entire family anymore, so that we can extort them and use them as leverage against you. We gave that up. We're the reformed Scientology. It always works. 10,500 BC.
Atlantis.
You are listening to a Rising from the Ashes bonus episode. Today is an awesome episode with our good friend Hraefn Wulfson. And I just wanted to let you guys know, on the Patreon, we're going to be doing a monthly show with Hraefn, since every time we talk with him, it's so splendid, it's so amazing, and you guys seem to love it. So we're going to bring him back for a monthly show on the Patreon. If you guys want to support us, the best way to do that is through Patreon. $3 a month. Go over there, check it out, see all the sweetness, the sweet juice that's there, all of the gnosis. Oh yeah. Also, don't forget to join the family group chat on Telegram, where the Fire Tribe conjoins and coagulates within its mixture, the mixture of community, the cohesion of collaboration. All links will be in the show notes. Enjoy today's bonus episode, but you won't hear this lovely voice anymore because I couldn't make it. But Dan holds it down as he does with his sweet crown of judgment and justice. Enjoy today's Rising from the Ashes bonus episode with Hraefn Wulfson.
Hey, what's up, Fire Tribe? Welcome to Rising from the Ashes. I'm Daniel Naki Dan. Roman is Roman, so he's roaming around. And he might join us a little bit later, maybe not. But today on the show, we got Hraefn Wulfson back, and we're going to be talking about some Antidiluvian ideas and some of his epiphanies that he had after the last show. So, how you doing, Hraefn?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Fantastic, man. We just had a cool interview this morning with Scott Crichton, who wrote like 4 different books on Egypt. So, I got Egypt on the brain.
Yeah, I've been. I mean, it's not new news or anything, but it has been. It's been coming up a lot lately. I've noticed in my various feeds. The discussion of tool marks especially what look like mechanical tool marks in stones on the Giza Plateau. And, I think that is not divergent, because I think there's a lot of evidence worldwide of some higher technology than we would anticipate from ancient cultures, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're talking about Pumapunku or whether you're talking about Giza, it's, there's a lot. There are a lot of questions. I'll just say question. How's that?
Yeah. So last time we talked, you had texted me and said that you had a couple epiphanies after the show, and you wanted to share some of your gleanings. So, what happened, man?
Well, boy, that's tough, because I've had a lot of epiphanies since then. Which specific ones I'm not quite sure. I'd have to go back, but one of them, I think I actually talked about this on the show, and that is the sort of the epiphany about the fire and ice structure.
Yeah,
which is that, using the chart here, the way I've always imagined it is the way I started painting this. But fire and ice are separate from each other, like this.
Yeah.
Where I actually think now that ice is the center and fire is the outside. So it's actually a sphere with a center, and that's pretty significant, because that creates a very different dynamic in how the whole tetrahedral tension structure works, right? Because what it says is that the center is the static, the center is the solid, and the exterior is the dynamic, is the kinetic, right? Like a proton and an electron. So I did find out one thing that was kind of interesting, because of course I'm very interested in this idea of hyperspheres, and the hypersphere is the dual sphere that exists in a double tetrahedron, right? Double reverse tetrahedron. And one of the things I just looked up, just out of curiosity, was, are there ever hydrogen atoms with 2 electrons? And it turns out there are. And they are components of the atmospheres of stars. That's where they occur, where you'll have a hydrogen atom that has 2 electrons. Those occur in the chromosphere, essentially, of stars, of the sun and stars, which is, in a weird way, plays right into what I'm saying, because that says that the star, it's recognizing the possibility that, as above, so below, right? The star is, in fact, a hypersphere. That stars are hypersphere. The sun is a hypersphere. So anyway, that was one.
Does that relate to like having a binary star, or being in a binary star system? Because a lot of people talk about that other star systems have binary to like suns and whatnot, but our star system only has the one sun. But some people think there might be a second sun way off in the distance. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I've heard that argument before. In fact, I've heard that about stars, that there is potentially a dark star in our own system, that is also orbiting, in a relationship. Of course, there's the whole Nibiru conversation, right? But generally speaking, binary star systems are talking about 2 stars that are in relation to each other. So Sirius A and Sirius B, for instance, right? Where you have the dark star that is affecting the that they're both affecting each other's orbits, something that the Dogon tribe in North Africa recognized, and that there was a cycle to it, right? So this is like the idea of a hypersphere is that the two things exist in the same space at the same time, but out of phase with each other, like almost like a star and an anti-star, right? That exists in the same location, but dimensionally different states, right? Kind of like matter and antimatter, kind of that idea.
What would that be in our star system?
Well, what it would suggest, and what I love about it, in fact, going back a few episodes, my blue friends, the information they were giving me suggests that I'll just use the Earth instead of a star. Mm-hmm. So it would suggest that our planet is a hypersphere, and that the hypersphere of our planet, we have an experience of it, but there's another world right here, right now. There's another world. But the question is that world, if you could actually move from this world to that world, to the other land, the other realm, it's in mythology all over the place, right? Mm-hmm. The underworld, etc. If you could move to that other space, would it have the same sky? Would the stars be different? In other words, is every planet, every star, every black hole, everything that has this basic geometry associated with it, are they actual intersections between, like cross-dimensional intersections? Is that what's going on? That's the question. And it is really strange when you think about how many of the really solid ancient mythologies suggest that the way to get to the other world is not off of the earth, but in toward the center of the earth. Whether it's Hades, whether it's the Anunnaki, whether it's Persephone, going into the underworld, whether it's Izanami going into the underworld, or that they're always going inside. And of course, my basic geometry would suggest that the intersection is at the center. That's where the actual crossover point is in the center, where you could transit from one tetrahedron to the other tetrahedron. Does that make sense?
Yes. Have you ever heard of the vitriol, or the meaning of vitriol?
Like the alchemical meaning of vitriol?
Possibly. The synonym?
Because I know that in alchemy there was the oil of vitriol, which I believe is vinegar. No, I can't remember. I did a whole bunch of research into alchemy because I built this whole set one time for a film, mm-hmm. and it was the cosmic mortician's lair. And so I made all these bottles with all these labels of things from alchemy and different sources. And there was an oil of vitriol. And I'm trying to remember what the oil of vitriol was, like what we call it now. And I think it might have been vinegar, but I'm not positive.
It says here, if you've ever been in a Masonic chamber of reflection, you may have seen vitriol or similar symbology. Vitriol as a word can refer to chemistry and mean sulfuric acid and related compounds, which eat away or attack other substances. But as an acronym, VITRIOL stands for a sentence in Latin: Visita interiora terrae rectificando and Venus occultum lapidem. My Latin is not very good, so in English it means visit the interior of the earth, and purifying you will find the hidden stone in English.
That is interesting because, and that actually makes a lot of sense, because the oracle at Delphi, one of the elements of that space, probably because it was volcanic in origin, was that there were gases and things that were coming out of the ground there that the seer would expose themselves to, which would kill them over a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And we do know that sulfuric acid is one of the things, sulfurous gases come out of volcanic vents. So that actually does make sense in a weird way, that you could go through a purification process. And that goes into the whole idea of everything from saunas to bathing in hot springs, which all have that kind of, there's often a sulfuric or sulfurous smell, right?
Yeah.
Which was believed to be curative in many cases. So, yeah, that's a very interesting information. I love talking to you guys, you guys, because it's very thought provoking. I always come away from these conversations
Yeah.
with things to think about.
Yeah. Shout out to Mario, Symbolic Studies, for asking me about vitriol the other day. So I had to look it up, and then we talked a little bit about it, and I found it interesting. I kind of came to a different conclusion of maybe purifying yourself to be able to go into inner earth, or maybe only a certain group of people could go into the inner earth because they had to have a bloodline. And then once you get into the inner earth, you can discover the knowledge that has been kept there throughout mankind, or whatever, something similar to that.
Interesting. Well, there's a long history, as you're aware, of going into the earth for answers. In fact, there are those who suggest that that's what the caves at Lascaux and Altamura and other ancient cave painting caves like that were potentially about. And if you go even to the cenotes in the Yucatan, where they've now found that there are entire underground cavern systems that are underwater that actually all potentially relate to the Mayan underworld, right? We have this strong thing about going, and it's funny because it's very terrifying to a lot of people. Like a lot of people, the idea of the claustrophobia, and the darkness, some say, womb-like. I go, yeah, well, if the womb was like that, what do you want to get out? Sort of.
You could also take it very spiritual too, and by purifying your brain, you can go inside your own self and seek clarity, or spirituality, nirvana.
True.
Yeah.
Well, and that's if you think of it almost from a Buddhist perspective, what would be the point of going into a cave, especially a dark cave? If you really want to experience loss of self, loss of ego, right? What a great place to go do that, where it's almost a sensory deprivation in a way.
Yeah.
Right? But without safety. Like sensory deprivation, you're in a tank and it's all very controlled. Caverns are not. Caverns can do all sorts of things. And it's very dark in caverns. Like we're talking no light at all if you don't bring it with you, right? And then the only thing, usually there's sound, whether it's movement of air, dripping of water, right? Occasional movement of rocks. And it's not uncommon for caverns, even deep caverns, to be somewhat inhabited by life, which means if you're sitting there in the dark, you get to listen to things.
Yeah. Kentucky goblins.
Whether it's bats or or whether it's bats or insects or whatever. I mean, there are things that live, in the deep places of the world, to quote Tolkien. Right? line that Gandalf says when he's talking about his encounter with the Balrog. Right? He says the things that haunt the deep places of the wood. Something. Anyway, well, you want to talk about this whole flood myth thing?
Yeah, man, I would love to hear your perspective because I'm sure it's a lot different than most.
I mean, it might be. I mean, the truth is, I mean, I've looked at the same source material probably as everybody else has. There are different echelons of the source material, right? But just to make my perspective clear, because there are different ways you can approach it. One way you can approach the subject is geologically. That's one way you can talk about it. The sort of the Graham Hancock, Robert Schoch sort of approach. There, of course, is also the folklore. Let's call it what it is, right? Mm-hmm. There's folklore about it. And it is interesting that folklore does seem to be many places in the world. It's not localized, but I would like to talk a little bit about, let's disambiguate some of the source material, because and it's funny that we were going to have this conversation because earlier today I was scrolling through Instagram or someplace, and there was a meme talking about flood myth, and it said Noah. It referenced Hindu, Buddhist, Christian, and one other one, and it said Christian, and it said Noah. I went, I really wish people would do their research, even little research, even small amounts of research. Noah is not Christian. Noah is Jewish. That's Judaic. That's Judaic. That got translated into Christianity, which of course is very funny because if you listen to Christ, he says, all that stuff in the past, we don't pay attention to that. The Old Testament doesn't matter. Only the New Testament matters. But nobody listens to that anymore anyway, which is very funny. But so first of all, I want to start by saying that I almost completely discount several tellings of the story only because I know that they're derivative from earlier sources. So, for example, the Judaic story is not Judaic. The Judaic story is the Sumerian story. That's right. What it is. It's from, right? So the whole Noah part of the story is them appropriating the story and then adding their own spin to it. So that right there makes me go, okay, let's just throw that out just for now. And then the Buddhist story, let's talk about that. Buddhism has only existed since 600 BC. Therefore, anything that's a Buddhist story is probably a Hindu story that got translated, or possibly a Tibetan story, but probably a Hindu story. So, and then, of course, I have the same argument about Islam. Islam has only existed since about 700 AD. There is no ancient Islam. That is a nonsensical idea. It is a brand new cult. It's newer than the other cults. Oh, I'm sorry, religions. It's the newer, they're all cults as far as I'm concerned. But, well, they are. They're all cults. Yeah. They're just, the only reason we don't consider them to be cults is that they have lots of followers and they've been around. They're cults that have persisted.
Yes.
So persistent cults apparently don't count as cults. Yeah. Although it would be argued that Mormonism has existed for some time, and a lot of people consider it to be a religion, but I would call it a cult. It's very culty in it, and I'm in the heart of it right now. I'm literally 6 blocks from the temple. And then Scientology is another one. Everybody agrees that's a cult, but if it sat around and was allowed to ferment for 500 years, people go, yes, the great religion of Saint Hubbard, and yes, oh no, we don't want all the personal information about your entire family anymore, so that we can extort them and use them as leverage against you. We gave that up. We're the Reformed Scientologists. It always works like that. It's very silly. But the point is that what are our actual sources in terms of the folklore? Well, clearly the most famous one outside of the Noah story is Atlantis. That's the most famous. And pretty much our entire body of information about Atlantis comes from Plato and the writings of Plato, who claimed but he claimed a lot of things that have been questioned. But the problem with Plato is that it's hard to, because so much of what he wrote was allegorical, it's hard to know if even characters like Socrates and that were documented in Plato's writings were ways to talk about modern circumstances at the time, contemporary circumstances at the time, but use possibly remembered folklore to make points about contemporary society, whatever that is. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a little difficult to know. Although, just really quickly, where did Plato claim to get his information? Well, supposedly it came from Herodotus, and Herodotus had spent time on the Nile talking to Egyptian priests, and that's supposedly where the story came from. Egyptian priests to Herodotus, and then to Plato, who wrote, Critias and too many words, names, Greek names for me to remember right. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. And there's actually another piece of material. There was another thing that made a reference to Atlantis that he wrote. I can't remember what it is. Anyway, I have to say that, have you heard of what's called the Eye of the Sahara?
Yeah, the rechat structure.
Which I have to say does match the geography described in Plato's account closer than anything else I've ever seen. I mean, it's got the Atlas Mountains to the north. It's got the rings. It's got a freshwater spring at the center. I mean, it goes on and on and on as far as the details. Biggest problem being that it's a little above sea level. Okay, it's a lot above, like 1,300 feet above sea level. But, we also know that the continent of Africa is a very active continent, that the Olduvai Gorge and other, these are big, the Rift Valley are all seismic, tectonic joints. So things move. We know that the Atlantic has been spreading for a long time, and we know that the Rocky Mountains exist because of exactly that kind of tectonic pressure, pushing up mountains, or the Himalayas with the South Asian, the South Asian subcontinent slamming into and forcing them up. I mean, we know these things, or at least we have very strong conjecture, and it's a good educated guess that these are the things that actually.
Yeah.
So, all of that being said, there are interesting similarities between Egypt, Samaria via Babylon, right? Epic of Gilgamesh.
Mm-hmm.
The Rig Veda actually makes references to the building of. Let's back it up. Based on, let's start folklore. So folklore says what? It says that at some point in the past, and I'm not even going to get into why right now. I'm just going to say what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that we know that there was a worldwide change that was cataclysmic in nature. We know that water levels all over the world rose dramatically and rather suddenly. And we're pretty sure we know why. And that is that basically the Ice Age ended. We had huge amounts of water all over the world that were tied up in gigantic continental ice sheets. In some cases, They were 2 miles thick. I mean, think about that. 2 miles thick of ice.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's a lot. That's like 10,000 feet. That's almost as high as Everest, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a lot of ice. And you can't have on a globe like this, or sorry, I don't mean to offend anybody. We'll say realm like this. Yeah, don't want to put anybody out. Might not be a globe, might be hollow, might be flat, might be a lozenge. I don't. Anyway, but the point is that clearly something happened. Water levels came up. We used to think. I mean, if you think about it, they used to think that the stories of Pompeii and Herculaneum were sort of like popular legend. They thought that the Romans were writing about, again, allegory, right? Yes, and this is what happens, bad planning, and not realizing until much later that no, they were actual cities that were buried by Vesuvius, in 79 AD. So we only recently have been discovering, and by we, I mean people other than me, we've been discovering off the coast of India in 125 feet of water, streets and walls. And that area has not been above water in 12,000 years. But we know that there are streets down there. We know there are structured buildings, and even have found metal and pottery and other things. Now, to be fair, it's off the west coast of India, and there's been a lot of traffic, so material could have fallen off of ships. And I mean, I'm always going to be pragmatic a little bit about the information, because it's really easy to go, oh yes, and look, there's pottery, and look, there's a nail. Yeah, that nail came out of a ship that sank and landed on the existing ruins potentially. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's always important in these conversations to temper to not have conjecture, but to temper our conjecture pragmatically, to be open to the possibility that we could be reading into things that aren't, like what's that supposed megalithic structure that's off the coast of Japan, right?
Yonaguni.
Yonaguni, which is a very compelling argument for it being man-made. I mean, there are a lot of planes and structures and right angles and things, but a geologist looking at the kind of stone could also say, yes, and these are fractures that can occur in some kinds of stone as well. Like, it could be a natural phenomenon. To immediately go, it's man-made, I think it needs to be explored and investigated more. I think there's if it is man-made, there's information that will come up eventually that will determine that, right? There will be something, cut marks, whatever, there'll be something. But I know that, and don't get me wrong, I'm very fond of Graham Hancock. I really like how he thinks, and I like how he goes out and looks at the world and through a specific set of eyes, right? But I also have watched him make conjectural leaps that I kind of go, okay, I understand you're trying to prove a point, but right? It's when you start to you bend the information to fit your model, as compared to evaluating it objectively. But I think he's not wrong about a lot of his ideas, because there are definitely things that he came across and he's illustrated that really raise some questions, about the antiquity. And of course, Robert Schoch and his evaluation of the Sphinx and the erosion patterns on the enclosure around the Sphinx. I don't think are wrong. I think that he's not off. The truth is that requires a certain kind of consistent rainfall to get those kinds of weather patterns, erosion patterns on that kind of structure. And that kind of rain has not been there since 10,500 BC. So how do you explain, we also now realize, based on the Egyptians' depictions, that the Giza Plateau did not, at the time that the pyramids, even if you go to the hypothetical time, I mean, not the hypothetical, the accepted time that the pyramids were built, the Giza Plateau did not look like it looks now. It was actually more like the Serengeti. And we know that. Like, it was more like savanna. Mm-hmm. There are animals depicted in Egyptian reliefs that have not lived in the area of Egypt for thousands of years because they require that kind of savanna, sub-Saharan savanna ecosystem to exist, and they're just not there. Certain kinds of gazelles and certain kinds of baboons and different things. So it's clear that while the Nile has stayed relatively fertile and wet, right, the area around it has obviously dried out a great deal. Like the weather, and of course, in part, it's because of the Atlas Mountains, which is very funny. The Atlas Mountains create what's called a rain shadow, and they have stopped. And I mean, the Sahara Desert really isn't that old. We kind of think of it that way, but it really isn't that old. That there was a major shift in the weather patterns on the planet, and all of a sudden there was a rain shadow across North Africa, and it created that sand dune, rolling sand dune thing. What's interesting about the sand dunes is that they imply something very interesting about that area, which is that it may have been ocean.
Yeah.
And that was ocean floor. Which takes me back to the Eye of the Sahara for a second, because that would also suggest, because the Sahara Desert goes right up to, the dunes go fairly close to that, that would suggest that there may have been shallow sea or something very near to that, right? Near to that structure. So anyway, one of the most interesting ones to me, and this is the one that's captivated me since childhood, and that I don't know if anybody remembers this. I sometimes realize I'm the old man in the room, but I remember when National Geographic released this map, and it was a map of the seafloors of the ocean, right? The seafloors of the ocean floor of the world. And that was in the 70s sometime. That I think is when that map came out. And I remember being transfixed by it. Like, I just thought it was a fascinating, because if there was anything that was going to prove the existence of Atlantis in the Atlantic Ocean, you'd think it would be that. You'd see landforms and the not the subduction zone, the fissure that runs
the plates
through the Atlantic Ocean. Right. And so I was very excited about that. But there was one thing that I saw and subsequently was picked up by satellite imagery, et cetera, that the more I learned as I got older, the more this has just been an absolute enigma. And that is that if you go back over to India, and you go to what's now Pakistan, where the Indus River Valley, where the Indus River ran, from the Himalayas down through that area and into the Indian Ocean, you can literally see that there was a riverbed that runs off the coast. So it comes off of Pakistan and goes out into the ocean. Mm-hmm. And it's very evident. And it goes out for quite some ways, and it's very large. This is a large, almost canyon. Now, if you know anything about rivers on the ocean, rivers that dump into the ocean create what's called an alluvial fan, which is all the sediment that's picked up by the river and carried out, and it dumps out into sort of this fan, which changes over time how the river enters the ocean. We have an alluvial fan at the mouth of the Mississippi River near New Orleans. There's this thing. Well, that's because the fresh water is hitting a larger body of water, and it's slowing down, which means the sediments that are being carried by it are dropped out of the water. You don't get a trench, that goes out like that unless that was exposed land that had the river running through it that then was covered with water.
Mm-hmm.
Because it just got hydrodynamics just don't work like that. So, and what I find fascinating is there's that, but then the other Indus River Valley culture, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa and other ancient cities that have been found along the banks of the Indus River, above ground, now in Pakistan. And now they're finding the remnants of cities in 125 feet or more of water off the coast of India. Dvarka being a good example. Dvarka was the ancient city of Krishna. And even according to the Bhagavad Gita, there was, epic battles that went on and on and on between Ravana and Krishna. And then eventually Krishna's city was consumed by the waves. I mean, it's right there in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there is a city of Dvarka that is on a modern city, contemporary city that's on the coast, but they did notice that ruins seem to go off under the water. And then they went out and started doing, apparently that's very, and that's not the only city. They found other cities out there too. But the water's very murky because of how the currents are right there off the coast.
Yeah.
And the reason they found it is that they were doing pollution surveys. They were trying to determine how pollution from India was affecting, how it was traveling and moving off that area. And they found these like literally grid system cities, walls, clearly built walls, at least at a depth of 125 feet. So what that tells us is that, these are the most common. These are the stories that everybody knows, right? Everybody hears about this. There was a very interesting piece of Native American folklore, and I believe it might be Modoc tribe off the California coast, that there was a popular story about this lake that was inland that had a whale in it. And everybody said, yes, Native Americans and their quaint mythology. That was really the kind of ethnologist approach, the archaeological approach to it, was that, yes, the whale of the lake. Well, something happened. They had to do something, construction or something, and they drained the river that connected the lake to the ocean and found a whale skeleton in the riverbed. So the question is, a large seafaring mammal like that, how did it get into the lake? Because clearly it got up the river course and it got into the lake. Well, if you had a time when there was a tremendous amount of water that rose, that would open up the possibility of a seafaring mammal making its way into a lake. And one thing that's interesting about a lot of these stories is they talk about the waters rising, and then it talks about the waters receding. And that always has puzzled me, because if it is ice melt, right, why would it recede? Like, but I think that the Black Sea is a good example of how you had places all over the world, possibly even the Caspian Sea and others, that were depressions that once the water reached a certain level, anybody who's played with water runoff in the mud, which I know I did a lot when I was a child, water running off and make dam, whatever. You know how that works, that if there's a depression and water gets there and it spills over whatever the little wall you make is, it will fill that up and the water will level out. And the Black Sea is a good example. I mean, that's a large inland sea. That was a large area that we know was a freshwater lake that was considerably lower in elevation, that when the water in the Mediterranean reached a certain level, it started to spill over the isthmus of the Dardanelles, and it carved a gap, and it put this huge layer of salt water on top of a freshwater lake. There are arguments that I've heard, some theories actually, that may be where the famous, Middle Eastern story of the flood came from, is that people lived along the banks of that freshwater lake, and that the compromising of the Dardanelles caused an entire civilization to get wiped out by sudden rising waters, and people basically had to flee living next to that freshwater lake. So, which is interesting, and the Black Sea is fascinating to me. Just as a side topic, it's fascinating because it's a very unique place in the world where we have essentially an anaerobic environment where things don't rot. Things that go below that layer, where the fresh water met the salt water, the fresh water is not fresh; it's far from fresh. But things that go down there, there's nothing to eat them. There's no bacteria because it's all dead. So we know that they've, what's his name? Bob Ballard, the same guy that found the Titanic, dropped a submersible and found a wooden Roman ship that was 1,600 years old with its mast still standing up, right? And there have been over 50,000 recorded shipwrecks on the Black Sea. 50,000. You realize what that means is down there? I mean, there could be Viking ships down there with the Vikings still in them. So that's a whole other topic that's just absolutely fascinating to me. But getting into, so we know that these things happen. We know that there's evidence all over the world that suggests that water levels rose. I've just given some ideas of why the water might have receded, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what does it actually say about what existed before? What's interesting about these stories, whether you're talking about the Bhagavad Gita or you're talking about the Rig Veda, whether you're talking about the Epic of Gilgamesh, it doesn't matter what one you're talking about. There is this strange commonality about descriptions of social, civilization, social order, languages, architecture, even technology that are all alluded to. And I think in these ancient texts, and I'm sure you've talked about it before, the Vimana and other elements from the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata, where, I mean, let's just ask the question instead of making any conjecture. What were they talking about? How did these ideas? Where did these ideas in these ancient texts come from? And it is interesting to note that the flood or this cataclysm, there's always a history before it happened. That should be one of our biggest clues. When you're talking about the flood story from the Sumerians, which then became transliterated through the Epic of Gilgamesh, etc. They're always talking about yes, and it was Sodom and Gomorrah is before. The Tower of Babel is before the flood in these texts. So the question you have to ask is, even if we, like I said, don't make the conjectural leaps about it, what were they referring to? What are they? Obviously, there's some model that's pretty consistent, whether you're talking about Atlantis or whether you're talking about the Sumerians or whether you're talking about the Indians. There is some, and now the possibility that there's a Mayan city off the coast of Cuba. Like I know that there's an argument there.
Pyramid.
I think they need to go and do more. Before I'm sold on that one, I need to see more data and more up close data, because the problem with using sonar to map the ocean bottom is there are a lot, especially at the depths they're talking about, there are a lot of anomalies that can create false information. Right? I mean, you can get bounce back off of things that can tell a story that's different than what's actually there. So, and I'm not discounting it. I'm just saying I think that it would be advisable to go and do more research before, come on, they've got LiDAR now, right? The LiDAR, that they were using in the Yucatan to actually, they've now realized that the Mayan civilization was far larger and far more complex than anybody realized before, because they can literally strip the canopy off and see, oh, there was a road there, right? There were structures and cities. But let's see, what was my point? Okay, so one of my big arguments also is that almost every civilization, whether you're talking about the megalithic Celts in Ireland, whether you're talking about Wales, whether you're talking about Sumeria, whether you're talking about Egypt, there is this one interesting commonality between them, which is people showing up with advanced technology, information, knowledge in boats. That is a very common theme, whether it's the 7 sages up the Nile, whether it's the boats coming up the Persian Gulf and landing at the confluence of the Tigris and Euphrates. And all of these things, all of these accounts do suggest, well, and I mean, come on, let's just go right into it. Even if you don't count those things, again, the story of one big boat being built, right? Beforehand. And they had the technology to build a boat. Boat building is not some kind of, hey, building a campfire, let's build a boat. There's a lot of technology involved, a lot of understanding and skill required to build any sort of navigable boat. Yes. Whether you're building it out of bamboo or whether you're building it out of oak, it doesn't matter. There's a lot there. So, but there is this commonality, and it would be interesting. Well, okay. So there's another part to it too, and that is that all over the world, there are also there are examples of architecture that suggest a very high knowledge of stoneworking, as we know, whether it's the big stone at Baal, that one stone in the wall at in Baal, what's that?
Baalbek?
Did someone just walk behind you?
Yeah, Baalbek. My son's here.
Okay, hi son. But Baalbek, right? That stone is mind-boggling in its size and weight, and we would struggle to move it now. It's huge. You think of the stones in Peru that are cut to fit together, that are gigantic. I mean, those are huge stones. And it's funny, people go, yes, the Inca ruins. The Incas denied that they made them. The Incas have denied repeatedly that they made them. They even told Pizarro they didn't make them. They built on top of stones that were already there. So clearly something was going on all over the world with a megalithic technology that does suggest a high level of civilization. What is also interesting to note, and I don't really hear people talk about this very much, but the Andes Mountains are the result of the same kind of pressure that produced the Himalayan Mountains.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that tectonic force. I saw this the other day, and it just, I don't know why this bugs me so much. It shouldn't bug me, but it does. Someone said, they were like, and when they climbed Everest, they found fossils on the top of Mount Everest, which means it was underwater at some point. I go, well, yes, but not because water was over the Himalayas. It's because they used to be seafloor and were pushed up. It's like there's this thing where people go, yes, the world has been exactly the way it is forever and ever. And then there was water, and then there wasn't. It's like, come on, some logic here, you're right. Recognize that the world is far more complicated and older than you even want to deal with, right? And a lot of things have happened in the course of this little planet that we're on, or lozenge or disc or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, one of the things I
always like to throw that in there as a poke.
One of the things I like to say with the mountain things is, are they hollow or solid? I guess depending upon how they were formed could determine that. If it's plates that push up against each other to create the mountain, they could definitely be hollow inside, right? But if it's just a different type of formation of a mountain, like rolling from earthquakes or whatnot, then I guess that could be a little bit different and solid underneath. So that's always kind of been a weird one to me.
I'm not sure if there's a single answer to that. I think that there are definitely, if you simply, like, what's interesting living where I live is I've got the Wasatch Mountains literally right here. I mean, I can look at them. I could open my curtains right now and look at them. And they are very much they're part of the Rocky Mountain chain, and they are very obviously, you can see it all over the place, the result of tectonic pressure pushing rock up, because you can see the folds. You can literally see, you can go into the canyons and you can literally see how the rock used to be like this, and now it's like that, right? And there are sedimentary layers that under incredible pressure have been changed. I mean, it's pretty evident. It's really interesting to live in a place where the geology is so obvious. Like you can literally see that the rock goes like this. It's literally folded up, right? Mm-hmm. And when you go up there, there's agate, and there are all kinds of rocks that are related to metamorphic pressure, where the pressures have become so extreme that he basically remelted, right? But it is interesting to note that we also have several stories in the world, whether it's the ant people in the Southwest, the Anunnaki, which I found very, very interesting. That's the name of the ant people, is the Anunnaki. Mm-hmm. I find funny. But a lot of conversations about people going underground to protect themselves from a cataclysm. That structures were built underground. There's that big city it's in Turkey, and it's multiple layers deep, and it's very, very old, and nobody even knew it was there for a long time. And it is interesting.
What's that one called? What's that called?
I don't remember. I can see it in my mind, but I can't remember the name. Anyway, but it's interesting that in that area of the world, we also have Göbekli Tepe, which has, I love it when they find things like Göbekli Tepe, and then they date them, and it completely screws up their preconceived notions about time. Because, Göbekli Tepe, everything says it's like 11,000 years old. That puts it right at the end of the Ice Age. And it exhibits technology, understanding of stone carving, stone working, alignments, etc. And the weirdest thing about that site, the weirdest part about it, is that it appears to have been deliberately buried.
Yeah.
That amount of work to deliberately bury it, and not like make it into tombs or anything, like literally just fill it up. It was filled up with backfill, right, of sand and gravel. And what do they estimate? There's something like 52 or 53 circles there. They've only excavated like a small portion of the whole site. It's a huge site.
Yeah.
Right? And you look at that and you go, okay, that level of technology, when supposedly we were barely farmers, makes no sense. And that's one of those arguments, I think, for there being something going on prior to the end of the Ice Age. So that, and I guess that's where my whole sort of perspective on it has come down to, is, okay.
That city in Turkey, by the way, is called Derinkuyu.
Derinkuyu, yes, thank you. Derinkuyu. There clearly are signs all over the world that there are stories that there was a civilization before. There were a lot of evidence to suggest that before the waters rose, there was civilization of some kind. That means that there was Ice Age civilization. That's the only thing that, it's not even a conjectural leap. It's the only thing that's possible. Mm-hmm. You have areas of the world where they have not been above water since the end of the Ice Age, and there's human remains, elements, architecture, structure under that water. There's like literally people can stand in a room and say, I don't know, okay, but underwater, hasn't been above water for a long time, clearly man-made. That kind of ends the discussion about whether there was civilization before there was water there, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you can't really argue with it. I do have a thought about why it wasn't more gradual and why most of these stories are cataclysmic in nature. And I think I'm sure this happened other places in the world, but one of our best documented examples of it is something called Great Lake Missoula. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So there was a time, obviously the ice was melting. There were huge ice sheets that covered Canada, most of Canada.
Yeah.
Covered under these very big sheets. And in I want to say it was in the 50s. It might have been earlier than that. Geologists started making observations all over central Washington state, northern Montana, into Wyoming, these areas, that there was evidence of a huge amount of water had carved the ground and created land ripples and all sorts of other things. And through charting and obviously conjecture and geology and other things, they came to the conclusion that as the ice was melting, depressions formed in the ice sheets, and they filled up with water. And they filled up with, in some cases, in fact, one of them is Great Lake Missoula, which they estimate was about 10,000 miles long. It was about 200 miles across and was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about a mile deep. Wow. Of water. And what they think happened is that there came a point in the melting process where the ice barrier wall that held up the southern end of it, the water started to spill over. And of course, if you spill water over ice, it melts it fairly quickly. And it broke. The ice dam that was there broke. And that water, all that water, emptied out in about 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's entirely possible that humans witnessed this. that there were humans that were present in North America that they probably didn't witness it for very long, but they probably did witness the breaking of the ice wall, because it would have happened about 12,000 years ago. It would have happened about that end of the Ice Age time. And we know that before the Ice Age ended, there were already at least some people in North America. We found evidence of that. So,
just ice giants.
Exactly. Well, the giants of Reno. I mean, you've heard of the giants of Nevada. You've heard of them, right?
Yeah, Lovelock.
Yeah. Well, so North America is such a weird enigma when they start digging around, and they find the weirdest stuff. And it's interesting how much has been absolutely dismissed because it doesn't fit the ideological, political, or accepted narrative of North America. But there are some very strange anomalies here. Structures that they cannot figure out who built them, that seem to predate other things. Evidence of human habitation. They've found things that don't fit the Native American physiology. Like it's hard to know what was going on this continent, and who was here and how they got here and how long they were here. But there is something that happened. Have you heard of the the Laurentide? I think it's called the Laurentide ice sheet. It was the main ice sheet over Canada. And there was an event that they're pretty sure, based on different things that occurred, where something came to the atmosphere and exploded, and didn't actually hit the ground, but it probably airburst like a comet or something over North America, that actually reversed the end of the Ice Age for about 1,000 years. It actually plunged us into a mini Ice Age. And anyway, going back to the Great Lake Missoula, is I'm guessing, since there were also ice sheets like that in North Central Asia, over parts of Europe, over north of China, that Great Lake phenomenon was probably happening in other places too as the ice melted, which would explain sudden rise. If you had these ice dams breaking and suddenly pouring water into the ocean directly or indirectly, that would cause not a gradual rise, but a sudden rise, right? And then as that was, that water is washing down over things, it's soaking into the ground, it's filling depressions, the water is going to come up and then it's going to go back. Black Sea, Caspian Sea, et cetera, et cetera. The Great Salt Lake, good example, which is almost dry now. It's the Great Salt Puddle at the moment. There's a place here called Antelope Island, which in the last 2 years has become Antelope Peninsula, because the water has dried up a lot. But the point is that it would have filled up basins like the Great Salt Lake, that outwash from that area. Which means that you could see how you could have cataclysmic rise and fall of water. Okay.
Right.
And it is interesting to note, going back to the Eye of the Sahara, that if you look at that from space, there is a definite indication that water has washed out of it toward the ocean for a long period of time. There's definitely erosion marks out of it, right? Now imagine if for whatever reason it filled up with water and then that water drained out. It could have a similar eroding effect, the same that you see in central Washington. If you ever fly in an airplane over central Washington, you can see it as clear as day. You can see these huge erosion patterns, right? That have scoured the land. There's even a place called Dry Falls that they say was created by that water washing over, and it was created in a short period of time. It was the size of Niagara Falls, and it dug a hole, and now there's no water because it washed out. But anyway, so as far as antediluvian civilization, that's unfortunately where we go really into the realms of conjecture, because we have folklore accounts, whether it's the Indian or whatever, but the hard proof is difficult, because really, where's our evidence? It's inaccessible because it's on the bottom of the ocean. And the bottom of the ocean, we like to think of it as something we can get to, but it really isn't that. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. It really is. It's really quite complex, especially the deeper it gets. Anything under 140 feet is very hard for humans to get to. Humans independently, just because of the pressure. You can take submersibles down to a certain point, but we forget that the oceans are vast. I mean, they cover huge areas. You'd have to somehow find a signal, a point, and then go and explore that area around that point. And even that's hard to do. Who knows? The technology might exist eventually where we can do that. Possibly the LiDAR, the dropping the sonar down.
Mm-hmm.
I think the area off the coast of India is very interesting, and I feel like it's worthy of a lot more exploration. I mean, that whole the Indian Ocean, that whole area between Madagascar and India.
There's an idea of Kumari Kandam, which was like a continent that touched India, Australia, and Africa in that area, that some people believe might have been an Atlantis type place. So there is that. There's talks about Mu being in the Pacific. There's talks of Atlantis being all over the place. They can't figure it out. The Rechat, Bimini Road, the Yucatan, all of these different places. There's all kinds of stuff going on with the Amazon and the Terra Preta. They know it's man-made soil, but they don't know how it got there. Well, obviously it got there from man at some point. There's all kinds of different things going on. With the Bok saga, it talks about Atlantis being in the north in Helsinki in Finland. And it talks about everything else being like a ringland or a copycat of this prototype of Atlantis. And I think that is kind of like a fulfilling explanation, because it shows you why there's so many different places that they think could have been Atlantis, because they were all emulating a place that was known as Atlantis. Even like when you get into America, there's a lot of like atoll type references. I think even there was a part of America called Aztlan, and it meant the land of whiteness, which could have meant either place of ice or place of white people. But regardless, they said that it came from their homeland. So they brought that name with them from there. So then you have, so land of whiteness. So that could be Atlantis too. Aztlan sounds pretty close to Atlan or Atlantis. And then even Ots, there's like, it means surrounded by water, I think it is what it means, kind of like an island term. Because there's Mazatlan and different other places like that in Mexico, South America area. So there's all kinds of possibilities of where Atlantis can be. To me, the obvious evidence is the fact, kind of what you were alluding to earlier, is all of these other stories start with big ships. Like obviously they had to have known. And even in the biblical one, if you want to use that one, Noah was like 400 and something or 500 years old when he built the boat to save everybody. So obviously he had lived 400 to 500 years somewhere else before that. So where did he live,
Right.
and how did he have family before that? If not because there was another civilization that existed before this flood. And then we talked to somebody earlier today who talked about some stories in Egypt where the Coptic Egyptians talked about them building the pyramids as almost like arks, so that they could fill it with everything from that civilization, so that when the flood happened, they had protection from it. And it talked about the waters receding, and then the mountains appearing, which were the pyramids, appearing from the water as if the water receded, and then there's the mountains, the pyramids there.
Interesting.
So we have a lot of these ideas, and obviously and even in the Coptic Egyptian text, that Scott Crichton was talking to us about, he said that there was some star watchers or whatnot that said that they saw the stars move over the heavens from their original place, and they knew that this was going to cause an ice age or a flood to happen, because they knew that the terrain, the sun was going to be in a different spot and stuff was going to melt. So they started building these pyramid structures as arks to save humanity, and so that way they would have seeds and knowledge and all these different things after the floodwaters eventually receded. So obviously there's people watching stars back then too, and knowing of ongoings and celestial knowledge of what was going to happen. And how is it that all these ancient texts we still go by today? Like, we still seek the ancient texts for knowledge on how to do things now. Like, obviously they had some type of knowledge that supersedes us. So where did that come from, if not from an ancient civilization that existed before? We always try to think that people were not as intelligent or whatever back then because they didn't have certain things like we have now, because they didn't have Palm Pilots and cell phones and Bluetooth, but maybe they had saber-tooth and
well,
they had different kind of tablets.
There's a whole parody. I think a South Park episode, I think, should be about that. No, what's interesting too. There was a series that someone did called After Man. Did you see that?
Yeah, where like nature just swallows up mankind, basically.
But it showed, based on decay rates of our building materials, how quickly our edifices would go away, right?
300 to 400 years, I think.
12,000 years is long enough for any number of things to simply go away.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, there could have been all manner of, of material and structures. You know, it's funny, just this made me think about kind of my theory about runes a little bit. That what I actually think the runes are is that they were a system that was designed to help retain a body of knowledge that could be easily carried via memory, because carrying physical tablets, artifacts, whatever, was not practical. So they came up with a system that would use ideographic symbols to spur bodies of knowledge in people that had the right teaching. They had the right training to do it. Like I said before, the Iliad is a long poem. It's like 10,000 stanzas long. And that was part of oral tradition. That story would have been memorized and told as, part of public performance before it was ever written down. Homer's the one who wrote it down. That's all we know. It's attributable to Homer writing it down. But everything suggests that the story had been around for some time before it ever got written down or turned into, what it was. So if Homer's doing that and recounting the Trojan War, then, which we're now pretty sure happened, and we are pretty sure we know where it happened and who was actually involved, and that they were real people.
That's Black
and it
Sea
was a real
stuff right
war.
there again too, right? That's
Yep,
Black
that's
Sea
Black
too.
Sea stuff for sure.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we know that, and it's certainly that area, Anatolia, it's certainly that in the Dardanelles, across the Dardanelles from Sparta, which of course is where Agamemnon joins Menelaus, and they attack Troy. But the point is that methodology of story retention and telling was part of the traditions of that part of the world for a long time. I mean, we know that the stories of Alexander, their experiences of being invaded by Alexander, are recorded in a very similar way. They have these whole long epic songs that talk about that experience of Alexander coming and doing hideous things to Darius, and burning the palace and all that. So, and then we have the bardic tradition in Celtic, the Celtic in Ireland and Wales, that long memory of very complicated stories that are memorized based on the structure of memorization, right? So, and that works with stories and parable and all that, but how do you record medical information? How do you record and save scientific information or mathematical information? Well, I'm suggesting that's what the runes are. They're a system of recording the less romantic elements, right? And then you tie them into these stories. And it's funny because I just, for the first time, I've actually watched the entire Viking series because I was kind of curious about it. So I watched the whole thing to the end. And there are a lot of things that I question highly about that series, but there are also some interesting points, which is the telling, how they told stories of the gods and the way that they portray that. Like that, one of my favorites is how they tell the story of Ragnarok, because the Athelstan keeps asking, I keep hearing Ragnarok, what's Ragnarok? And so then the seer, they burn the leaves and everybody gets a little high, and then they tell the story of Ragnarok. And the thing is that it's very poetic. But if you listen to the material, what they're talking about, they're describing Earth phenomenon. In fact, they're describing Earth phenomenon that very likely could have happened at the end of the Ice Age. Mm-hmm. They're talking about eclipses and the mini Ice Age and I've argued for a long time that Ragnarok is not something that was going to happen. Ragnarok was something that already happened. I think that Ragnarok was in the past. I don't think it was a future event. I think it was a past event that they were remembering. And it's interesting because the gods die during Ragnarok. Now think about that. Okay, so let's just hypothetically say that Ragnarok is actually an antediluvian story. I mean, it's right. Flood era story. Mm-hmm. And that what we're talking about is maybe it's the little Ice Age where things were going along, but then all of a sudden there was an explosion in the sky and the wolf swallowed the sun and there was war and there was famine and there was all these things because that's what a little Ice Age would do. But there was clearly a golden age before Ragnarok.
Right.
That's recorded in the Eddas. And so but it is interesting that we do, and I think the reason, and this goes right to Atlantis too, what was going on in the world that so many cultures not only experienced something, but had this incredible need to project the knowledge of that experience forward. They said, this is something that can happen. No matter how strong your kings are, no matter how stable you are, no matter how entrenched in tradition you think you are, things can happen here that will fuck all of that up totally, completely, and you will have to rebuild. My argument is that our entire civilization is a refugee civilization. We are the survivors of a cataclysm of a high civilization that existed before. And that we've taken it maybe to new levels, different levels, but human ingenuity is a pretty bizarre thing. We'll come up with, I mean, come on. What are we doing right now? You've got headphones on your head. You're talking into a microphone that I can see. We're talking over a device that has more computing power than, in fact, what did they say? 1,000 times more computing power than the computers they use to figure out, if you believe in this sort of thing, the moon landing.
Yeah.
Right? And we're walking around with that in our hand.
Right.
And there are now computers that are using atoms in solid state chunks to move data.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what, right?
And they've teleported an atom. So that means they could teleport knowledge to somewhere else then too, because they could put knowledge onto that atom and teleport it wherever they wanted.
Did I tell you guys my what if?
What if what?
Did I tell you the what if?
Hit me with it. I love what ifs.
I had a what if story. I said, okay, so let's just look for a second at the Bhagavad Gita, where we see these big, huge, colossal battles being fought out between gods, right? This is something that's portrayed in the Indian epics and others. In fact, you even see it in the Sumerian stories, whatever, gods fighting with each other, right?
Yeah.
And using what are described, the kind of weapons that are described seem like plasma weapons. Sometimes they sound like nuclear weapons. I mean, they're very high-tech weapons. And all of this is before the water rose. So that's an interesting point. But, okay, so I said, just once, I said, okay, let's just do a what if. What if we kind of follow the Zecharia Sitchin model of things, that there are spacefaring beings that's what they do. They travel around looking for resources, right? Like every living thing tends to do. And they come to Earth and they find this planet and they find life on it and they find proto, hominids on it. And that there's to follow the Sitchin model, there are the EG who are sent down to extract the minerals. And they're saying, well, screw you guys, you pretentious Anunnaki. We don't want to do all the work. So can you take these monkeys here and turn them into something that can do work for us so we don't have to do it? And they go, oh, fine. Well, lazy bastards. Okay. So they create humans. They create us to do work, basically as a slave race. This is, well, so there are Homo sapiens on this planet that are biological constructs. They are created, they are engineered, if you will, to do different tasks too. Different groups are engineered to do different tasks, right? You have people that got to run things. You got people that they just need their labor. They, different, monitor systems, bureaucracy, whatever. Okay. But they have to be smart enough to run their technology, whoever they are, right? Mm-hmm. Well, let's just say hypothetically that two of them show up and they're adversaries and they get into a big ass fight. And in the middle of this big ass fight, the Earth actually gets blown up. Not in that Lucas-like Alderaan vaporizing sort of way. I mean, it gets blown up the way probably a planet would blow up, fracture and break up. There'd be big chunks, right? It's not vapor. It's blown into larger pieces. Well, now what if that actually happened? And what if another group, this other group did, the other adversaries, they could care less, but another group said, well, wait a minute, wait. We created these sentient beings on here. We just blew up the planet that they're on. We should try to save them. right? Because it's not like they're ants. They're relatively intelligent and they're conscious, and we did spawn them, so we probably should take some responsibility. Mm-hmm. So what do? They create some kind of a sphere to go around the Earth, and they create some sort of a force field technology that pulls those chunks that are left back together. Now, you realize most humans on the planet have been wiped out, because that's what happens when you blow up the planet. And a lot of animals got wiped out too. A lot of life, who knows? Dinosaurs, who knows? Or the last of the dinosaurs. So they use this force field to pull these chunks together. And then to hide the force field, they cover it with water, because the chunks that are left fit together, but they don't entirely fit together, right? Mm-hmm. So there's this, we'll call it a faux Earth, that would be hollow in the center, that is floating inside of a sphere that has projected on it what we think our sky is. And it has other technologies. And then we have the moon, and the moon is here, and it's a physical thing, but basically it's the operational station that's watching over all. And then they say, well, clearly we can't, this solar system is screwed up, or, this situation is untenable. So we're just going to take this and we're going to go find a planet that's enough like it that we can just move these critters on here. Because what's the whole post-flood story? Be fruitful and multiply. Why? Because almost all the people got wiped out, right? Mm-hmm. So now my what if is, what if we are on a remnant planet that's floating inside of a sphere that thinks that we're in a relatively fixed position in space, when in fact we're not. We haven't been in our solar system for some time. We're inside of a giant Death Star type sphere that's moving through space. And that notice that all of a sudden in the last few years, what's been going on? Oh, we've got Hubble looking out, and we're finding exoplanets, and we're finding all these planets around other stars of other kinds, and we're looking for the one in the Goldilocks zone, Earth-like planets, right? Well, what if the reason that's happening is not because those are 12,000 light years away, but because they're nearby. We're actually close to them, and the cataclysm happened 12,000 years ago. So the truth is, we've been traveling through space, and we're just getting close to a possible home, some options. And so the our benevolent overlords that are in the moon, mm-hmm. just to run with it, right? Our benevolent overlords that are in the moon are going, okay, well, the population of the Earth has gotten, their civilization is back up. We've got a good population. Now, all we have to do is create enough of a cataclysm, not to destroy them, but to mask the fact that we are secretly moving them from the remnants of the old Earth onto a new Earth. And there has to be enough of an upheaval to rationalize why suddenly landforms are different than they were on the planet, right? So it made me think of this one episode of Star Trek Next Gen, where Worf's brother has been living amongst these people whose planet is falling apart. And so what he does is he beams them onto the holodeck into a holographic cave system, and is leading them from the land where everything is bad to a new land where everything will be good.
Yeah.
Right? And I went, and see, the thing is, I have a great mistrust of media. I think that they are constantly doing things to prepare us for things, program us for things, create ideologies or ideas they want us to embrace, because it's all part of someone else's plan to get us, to do what they want us to do. I said, well, if you take the whole exoplanet idea, shows like Next Generation that talk about going to a new planet, Passengers, movies about colonizing new planets. This is an ongoing thing, going to Mars. What if going to Mars is not going to Mars? What if going to Mars is not going to Mars at all? What if Mars, we haven't been anywhere near Mars for a long, 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 long time. What if the going to Mars is really about us going to the new exoplanet and that they're just preparing us, and that Elon Musk is probably not even a human. he's probably something else entirely. But you notice even Werner von Braun, what was his obsession? Mars, going to Mars. Elon Musk, Mars. They're all obsessed with going to Mars. Why? No, maybe because Mars is the protoplanet that we are that will show up on. That when we arrive, it will not be what we think it is. Maybe we still got some time, 100 years or more. So they're hoping, well, we're going to terraform Mars. We're not really terraforming Mars. We're just getting ready for the new planet. Anyway, that's my what if. Oh, and that we never got off the ark. That the Earth is the ark, and we never got off the ark.
Ah, interesting. Yeah,
that's my what if.
How much of that is what if, and how much of that is knowledge that you've attained from your blue friends?
Well, the weird part. So this is a weird thing that I've learned about all that is that if my audio goes dead for a second, it's because it's about to go.
Okay.
It keeps telling me, it keeps yelling at me in my ear. There are things that have come up in my process of kind of trying to understand them and their whole part in my life. I wrote a fictional story in 1997 inspired by them. It was total fiction. And it was going to be a script. That was the whole idea. It was going to be a film script, which we did write a script eventually, but the script has problems. But anyway, the point is that my suggestion in my story was that they were travelers. This is fiction now. They were travelers that the way they explore planets is that they are born as the most mobile and intelligent being on the planet to explore the planet. They don't come in a physical form themselves. They are born through someone, born as that, which is why we have avatars of Vishnu, and we have, the jaguar child that spawned the Olmec civilization, which led to the Mayan civilization, on and on and on. We have these proto people that are unlike other people that seem to have incredible influence on changes in civilization. So my supposition in my fictitious story was that there are people who are descended biologically from the people that were physically changed, because that's the thing. You can't accommodate their consciousness without evolving the vessel. And the evolved vessel then reproduces, and hence the reason we suddenly have all kinds of Homo sapiens, Homo sapien activities all over the world. Well, in my story, what I was suggesting was that every time hang on. Hello.
You're good. Just continue like that. That's fine.
Second, I just lost everything. Aha. Okay. Sorry about that.
No worries.
I'll be as close to the microphone as I can. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you good.
Huh. Weird. Okay. Well, and basically what happened is they didn't realize when they came to this planet that their presence was going to have such a profound change to the vessels they inhabited. And so basically, our entire civilization was the byproduct of them just exploring kind of accidentally. And so they've been using the genetic descendants who have some consciousness connection to them, using them to clean up the evidence of their arrival in the archaeological record. So they'll find them because there'll be artifacts that have aliens depicted on them. And so they go, we need to remove that because we need to try to uninterfere with we need to uninterfere with this species as much as we possibly can because we basically made a mistake. So my supposition in my story is that we were fundamentally an accident that they're trying to correct their involvement.
Kind of like
You still there?
yeah, kind of like when you go through time. Can you hear me? No?
Yes, I can.
You can?
There are weird things in my house. Sorry. That does seem to happen.
Kind of like the idea of time travel, yeah.
Say that one more time.
Kind of like the idea of time travel. How when you travel through time and you mess with history, it changes outcomes. So because they were here and left a footprint, they're trying to cover up their footprints or their tracks that they left. So that way we can get over it and go on our own path.
Exactly. It's interesting. There are a few people. I don't consider very many modern people to be prophets, but there are two people that I sort of consider to be prophetic in their own way. George Carlin is one of them. He seemed to be a sort of a modern philosopher prophet. Yeah. But actually, Douglas Adams, because even though he was writing satire and humor, if you spend as much time with The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and with Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency as I have, which is I actually have both of those series on my phone, and I listen to them often. I've listened to all of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy many, many times.
Yeah.
I have the whole radio series, and then I have the whole book read by Douglas Adams of Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. And the thing that's interesting is he clearly, yeah, I know. Hang on one second. There are ideas. What you realize listening to the humor of Douglas Adams is that he was an incredibly intelligent man. Like his understanding of everything from physics to space travel to evolution to you name it was bizarrely advanced if you actually like look into it. So what was my point? Oh, my point was that like he'd make statements in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He goes, what is it? It said it goes, if anybody ever really figured out what was really going on, it would collapse and be replaced by something completely new. Right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that many people suggest that this has already happened, that the universe we're in is not the universe we think we're in, that this is a new universe that has emerged because they're mutually exclusive. They can't both exist at the same time. Like really, really intense, broad ideas that are wrapped up in humor, which is one of the best ways to do it. Right?
Well, I mean,
you want to expose people?
He did say the answer to everything is 42.
Which is interesting because apparently he was very into computers. He was like a coder as well, like a programmer. And 42 is some coding number that has to do with I don't know. I don't know the computer science behind it, but there's some significance to the number 42 as far as systems.
If you take the word math and you do gematria with math, M is 13, A is 1, T is 20, H is 8. And if you add it all up, it's 42. So
interesting.
The answer to everything is math, which is very, very true, right?
There's a compelling argument there. I can't deny. Yeah, no, it's a weird thing. I don't know why this made me think of it. Well, it's because I have an obsession, as you know, with the number 8 and the number 9 are both incredibly significant numbers for me. So the thing is, these things play out in weird ways. So, and this is going to sound trivial, but it struck me because it wasn't. I went to the farmer's market yesterday, and there's a woman who sells really good peaches there. And I had $17 with me. And I walked up to her and I said, how many peaches can I get for $17? And she said, well, here, and she was doing it by weight, right? So she puts it on the scale and she weighs it. She goes, oh, well, this one's a little underweight here. I'll throw another peach in there. She did. I didn't see the peaches until I got home because they were already mostly bagged, except for the one she added. And I got home and I took the peaches out of the bag, and I was thinking about other things, and I put them in a bowl. And I said, I'm going to try one of those peaches. So I ate a peach. And as I ate the peach, I looked in the bowls and realized there were 7 peaches in the bowl. She'd given me 8 peaches for $17. 1 plus 7. And I didn't see the 8 until I picked up the 1 and was eating it and realized there were 7 left. And I went, okay, weird rhythms. I mean, come on. It's a little thing. But I think that's how things work. I think that there are these harmonics that are running through things all the time, and that we will, and it's not just a matter of we see them; it's that they'll manifest for us. I mean, that was a direct manifestation. 17, 1, 7. I eat 1. 7 and 1 is 8. There are 8. I eat 1. It's 7 and 1. I mean, it's like, come on, right? So
when we were talking,
go ahead.
To Scott earlier about the pyramid, he had mentioned that there's 8 sides on the pyramid, on the Great Pyramid, and then there's a capstone, right? So you have your 8 sides on the pyramid, and you have your capstone, which is your seat, which is what you were talking about before. Yeah.
And the sides of the pyramids are equilateral triangles.
Yep.
There are 4 equilateral triangles laid like this. Now, granted, there are 4 equilateral triangles around a square.
I think they're sandstone, actually, not granite. But it's a joke.
Actually, I think that they're limestone. I think they're limestone blocks.
Yeah, you're probably right.
But the point is that and it was a guy in 1940 that was flying over the pyramids on the dawn of the spring equinox, and that's an interesting thing. That's when he saw the 8 sides, because there are these slight indentations on the sides of the Great Pyramid that create 8 isosceles triangles, which is interesting. Right? Which, by the way, Pythagoras was all about isosceles triangles. That was his thing, right? He spent 20 years studying with the priests on the Nile. The Pythagorean theorem isn't his. Pythagorean theorem is Egyptian.
Right.
He just learned it, and then he wrote it. He goes, see, this is one of those frustrations, going back to our whole story about folklore that I have, where people will go study someone else, they'll learn something, they'll tweak it just a little bit so that it is different, it matches their cultural context, and then they'll say, no, I came up with that. No, you didn't. You went and stole it from somebody else and then rebranded it. That's all that happened.
Yeah,
right?
It reminds me of Vanilla Ice.
That's a fascinating. At least he tried. Milli Vanilli didn't even try.
Yeah.
Anyway. Yes. No. Well, Vanilla Ice, and then in his own way, Eminem. I mean, it goes on and on. But Vanilla Ice definitely did that. That's.
There was a song. Actually. There was a song, and he basically stole a sample of it and added a ch, and then said, "Oh no, he made that, not the other band."
It was a Queen. It was a Queen song.
Was it Queen?
Under Pressure.
Yeah, Under Pressure.
Yeah. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, dun, dun. That's Under Pressure.
Yeah. Under Pressure.
I just came up. what was that? There was a guy. What was it? There was the group Art of Noise in the 80s. They and they said they came up with that. It's the Peter Gunn theme. Like, everybody knew it was the Peter Gunn theme. It's like, you didn't come up with that. Maybe you were high and fell asleep on the couch and heard it on TBS late at night, but you did not come up with it.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, and I know we kind of got away from the antediluvian thing. But it's really Vanilla Ice. It's all about Vanilla Ice.
Yeah.
No, it's.
That's like all these
I said.
That's like all these ancient cultures. They're not actually their own culture. They're all stemming from Atlantis and remembering the same thing. You know.
That was I was going to say earlier. There was a documentary that I saw once about a guy who had a theory about what Atlantis is.
Mm-hmm.
And that it wasn't one localized place,
right.
That it was a whole civilization, and that what it was the megalithic civilization. That the people who were building the stone structures on Malta, on
Egypt,
Crete,
Sumeria,
all these places where they're the megalithic builders. And that the story of Atlantis is an analogy, but it's an analogy of talking about. It's like, how do you localize into a single story a cataclysm that happened worldwide to a whole global civilization in a time when nobody understands global?
Mm-hmm.
Right? How do you talk about global when nobody understands global? Right. You say, well, there was a city, and it had these rings, and there were these colors. The one thing that I always caution myself and others to keep in mind whenever you're reading ancient texts or studying them, is that anytime you have references to colors, shapes, or numbers, be very careful about reading them literally, because a lot of times those shapes, colors, and numbers have symbolic meaning in the context of the culture that's writing them down. So, for example, they get very excited about the age of Noah or the age of the patriarchs in the Old Testament. The problem is the Old Testament was written in Kabbalistic verse, and Kabbalistic verse is a way to use an existing story to encrypt essentially all kinds of other information in the story. So the numbers in the Bible are all related to a very complex system of deeper meaning. So I'm always cautioning people about getting too hung up on the sizes of things and the shapes of things and the ages of things as demonstrated in the Old Testament, because it was written, there are mysteries hidden within just the style and method of recording the stories themselves. So, like, for example, it's entirely possible that the numbers associated with the ages of the patriarchs in the Old Testament are actually not related to passage of time at all. They could be star positions. They could be 1,000 other things that the Kabbalists at the time, who were writing it down, were encrypting information into this text. The perfect example of that, I was thinking about this. I was going to bring this up, and I was thinking about it earlier today. Have you ever seen the film Contact?
Yes.
With Jodie Foster?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that film happenstantially makes a very interesting point in this direction. So what do the aliens send back? They send back Hitler's speech at the opening of the 1936 Olympic Games, right? Because it was broadcast into space.
Mm-hmm.
So And everybody gets all flipped out about the fact. They're going, oh, Hitler. Ooh. And they go, no. It's because it was one of the earliest broadcasts that was actually effectively sent into space. It was our first message. Really, it was one of our first messages, visual messages into space. So what did they do? They sent that image back to us. They sent that material back to us, but interlaced with a whole bunch of other data. That it took them a while to realize that the message they were receiving back was far more powerful than the one that was set out, and had interlaced with the visual frames, had frames of data that were put into the middle, were added into it. And that's a great analogy, in my opinion, for what a lot of these ancient texts actually are, just as what I say about the runes and everything else. The stories themselves are merely the carriage. They are a way to move information in a way that people will remember it and be able to do something with it down the road. And I think that that's really what we've got going on probably in the Old Testament in a lot of cases, is that it's
like putting the medicine in the dog treat.
I think that's the best. That's fantastic. I like that a lot. Yes, because a spoonful of sugar does help the medicine go down.
Exactly.
At least according to Julie Andrews. But I think that the same thing is probably true, because if you think that was a method that they were using, we know that there's tremendous information in the Egyptian system. It's just the Egyptian system lasted longer than most of the ancient systems did. It lasted closer to more recent times, which means we have systems of hieroglyphs, and we have even evolution of systems of hieroglyphs that we know that they meant something a little different in this dynasty than they did in this dynasty. We know that. I mean, it's evident. I did a period of study recently into Egyptian mathematics, because I was very curious about how they structure. And it's very evident, by the way, if you study Egyptian mathematics, that the Roman numeral system actually came from the Egyptian numeral system. Boy, talk about the great appropriators. Holy mackerel. The Romans were one of the greatest appropriators outside of the Japanese. But anyway, but the point is that if you look at their number system, it's like every symbol that represents a numeral has another related meaning, right? It's a frog, or it's a cane of cypress, or it's a spool of rope. But they all have a quantitative value that and the way you stack them is exactly the same way that the Romans stacked symbols to create especially larger numbers. I was doing very rudimentary studies in Egyptian algebra, and they did have algebra. They used algebraic systems, an algebraic system. And let me tell you, my brain started to hurt. I was never great at algebra anyway, but then trying to go through and do problems in Egyptian algebra was I'm still glad I did it. It was still a great exercise, but it was just a lot. But anyway, the point is that we know that that written language in general, almost all of written language has ideographic beginnings. And because it has ideographic beginnings, ideographs are representations. They are symbolic representations of something that had a specific importance or meaning in the world. The Chinese started the same way. Egyptian hieroglyphs started the same way. Cuneiform, they now realize, started the same way. That all of those kind of abstract, Sumerian text, triangles had protoforms that were shaped like things like fish, and and they were ideographic, right? So chances are Arabic is ideographic. Sanskrit is probably ideographic, in its origins. So, I mean, it makes sense. That's how we talk about the world, dog, right? We say that's a dog, right? So if you're going to talk about and we make a sound now, sound, that's a dog. Dog is sound, means that thing over there that's doing those things that dogs do. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the evolution of written language is an obvious evolution of spoken language, and the same kind of assigning meaning, especially abstract meaning, to things then related to sounds. Of course, the Egyptian system to a degree, but the Chinese system clearly retains more of that ideographic direct representation. This is, Tian, and the symbol of Tian is obviously a mountain with the sky and then the space above the sky, and Tian means heaven, right? So, I mean, it retains its ideographic, almost animistic root origins, I think. But anyway, the point is that as soon as we get it, it's so funny that if language is structured that way and language works that way, well, why wouldn't storytelling also work that way? Right? Where, why wouldn't storytelling work that way? Where you say, I want to teach my child not to stick their hand down the hole, so I'm going to tell them the story, and I want them to not be greedy. So I'm going to tell them the story about the Aesop fable about the monkey putting his hand in the jar to pull the olive out or the date out, and then closing his fist and realizing he can't get his hand out of the top of the jar with his fist closed, so he has to let go of the, it's like we're always using obvious stories to transmit and transliterate subtleties. So why would that be new? That's why would it be new, and why wouldn't you have that going back to before? It's true in every culture.
Mm-hmm.
It is interesting, by the way. I was going to say something about another part of the world where people showed up across the ocean, and that is the Quetzalcoatl story,
mm-hmm.
right? That's the bearded white man that showed up, that they thought Cortez was the second coming of, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got Viracocha, or Viracocha, depending on how you pronounce it, in the Andes, right? The Viracocha, the bringer of knowledge that came and brought and taught the people how to build stuff and make stuff. There was this attempt to preserve and rebuild after this cataclysm, whatever it was. And it is evident from the architecture, from the distances traveled, that clearly whoever was doing it had a knowledge that made it possible for them to even do those simple things, which I think ended up getting preserved in other cultures. I think that if you look at, I go back to this. In fact, what's one thing I really liked about the series Vikings is they really exposed the brilliance of Viking boat building and shipbuilding. Mm-hmm. Like, they really talk about the fact that they came up with a kind of vessel that could be windborne, could be oared, was low center of gravity, was you have a ghost, just close your door. Just kidding.
My son.
But they were low draft ships that could go up rivers and were built to be flexible so that they could move over the open ocean. This is an incredibly advanced understanding of engineering, right? And you can't tell me it started because, and see, this is the logic, and this is what's weird about the logic. They go, oh, well, we found primitive dugout canoes. Well, yeah, you've got a bunch of people that were part of a big civilization that understand how to do things, but they have limited technology at their disposal now. They don't have all the it'd be like it would be like in The Road Warrior, that film, The Road Warrior, right? What are they doing? Their GM isn't around anymore. They have to hobble together what they can. They have to have enough knowledge to figure out how to make an internal combustion engine work that's passed down, whether it's a motorcycle, whether it's another kind of vehicle. Some people obviously have the intelligence. They figured out how to still drill and refine petroleum in some limited to some limited degree.
Mm-hmm.
They're salvaging. And my guess is, and I love all those, by the way, I love all those dystopian films of the 80s about how people would live after the fall of our civilization, where you've got the VW bus that's been turned into a horse-drawn, cart, basically. Mm-hmm. And that's what would happen. Eventually, the last pieces, the last vestiges of the fallen civilization would get broken and decay and fall away, and they would adapt what they know to new resources, new tools, to their circumstances. We are an adaptable species. That's what we do. The reason we are alive is because we are adaptable, and we have an incredible ability to transform our environment, right? To make it so that we can. Oh, by the way, interesting side note about Ragnarok. What happens at the end? What's one of the last thing that happens during Ragnarok? Vidar, who is Odin's son, Odin's actual son, by the way. Thor is not Odin's son. Mm-hmm. Balder is not Odin's son. In fact, I would argue that Balder never existed, but that's a whole other topic. I think that Balder is a Christianization creation. I don't think Balder was actually part of the original stories, because he doesn't make any sense outside of being a Christ-like figure. Mm. His father is the All-Father. His mother takes care of him and dotes over him and makes everybody in the world not hurt him, but Mistletoe can hurt him. And Loki, in fact, I think the story of Balder is to try to turn Loki into the devil. Actually, I think it's part of turning Loki into Lucifer. But anyway, other topic. But the point is that Vidar. Sorry, what story was I telling? Oh yeah. So Vidar, what does he do? He takes a log, a piece of the trunk of Yggdrasil, which has fallen during the whole Battle of Ragnarok, and he takes two humans and puts them in the log and puts them on the other side of the world from Ragnarok, from the battle, so that they will survive the destruction.
Interesting.
It's an arc story.
Yeah.
I mean, it's another arc story. And here's what's interesting. The Battle of Ragnarok is very revealing, because what is actually going on in that battle? Forces of nature, which is Loki's brood, have all become uncontained, and they are moving across the world. The fire giant of Muspelheim, the fire giant, his name is Surt, and the sons of Surt are marching from the south across the land, burning everything as they go. Jormungand rests free, the world serpent, breaks free from the oceans and comes across the land, spewing poison across the land. Fenris, who's been chasing the sun, swallows the sun, and the earth becomes dark. Then what happens? Thor, the god of thunder, gets into a full-on battle with the world serpent, and they destroy each other. So thunder and lightning destroy and are destroyed by the battle to the death with the world serpent. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm pretty sure that the world serpent is the Gulf Stream,
right?
And that the Vikings knew about the Gulf Stream. They knew also that the Gulf Stream controlled the weather. What happens when the weather is disrupted by cataclysm? It all goes to hell. Mm. What happens when you have massive climate change going on? Huge forest fires, right? That's one thing that happens. You have, and who else is it? So that's, and then Odin fights Fenris, and they destroy each other. So in other words, and then right before that, there is a 3-year winter, the worst winter ever, and there's no food, and it goes on and on and on. Well, all of this is a big argument for it being the little ice age after that happened because of some kind of a cataclysm that we're pretty sure is like an asteroid, or not an asteroid, but a comet exploding over the ice that caused the ending of the ice age to kind of return for a little while. That's Ragnarok. But anyway, my point about the Vidar is that the whole point is that these people were put into something to protect them on the other side of the world, so that the battle could play out, and then the world could recover, and then the world would be renewed, and the gods would be gone. The gods were dead. Although Vidar is the son of Odin, which means the cycle starts over again. The Allfather never really goes away, which is interesting for a lot of reasons. But my point is that even in the Norse myth, it's there, this story, and that there is this thing about preserving humanity. That's a recurring thing. Whether you put them underground, put them in a log, put them in a boat, which a log and a boat could be easily cross-correlated as the same kind of thing. The fact that the Anasazi / Hopi talk about that whole topic, about the ant people coming and taking them underground and protecting them, and that they emerged from the third world into the fourth world. In other words, the world that they came out into was completely not the world they'd gone under the ground.
Here's another way to look at that Hopi story with the ant people taking them underground. Because what do ants build? They build ant mounds where they, push the sand up, and we have everywhere mounds in America. So maybe they took them into the mounds to protect them from the flood, and then when the flood was over, they were able to come out of the mounds. Hence, like coming out from on Earth, right? From the earthworks.
Well, and you know what? What's interesting is that so the thing about humans that's really interesting historically is that they, for obvious reasons, tend to build their habitation, city, civilization along river courses or on ocean shores. So here's an interesting question. Are there any people on the earth that have cataclysm stories that were nowhere near oceans that still have a cataclysm story? And how did they deal with it? And so you realize that all the cataclysm stories, whether they include a flood or not, could be describing the same cataclysm.
Right, exactly.
It's just you had people that were in different places, Like my question is this. Is there a Mongolian cataclysm story? Is there an Eskimo cataclysm story? Is there a Central African cataclysm story? Right? I mean, we don't know. There probably are.
Dogon, right?
Well, that's North Central, which would still be adjacent, generally speaking, to the sub-Saharan cultures, whether it's Ethiopia, Nubia, Egypt. There was also they've found now in the Sudan and Chad area, they've found cities, ancient ruins,
all kinds of pyramids,
and there's pyramids, but also like cities.
Yeah.
Also, it's interesting. In Central Asia, like northern Iran and into the steppes of Central Asia, they're still finding them. They'll find cities that are it's just the foundations, but it's amazing how many of those cities are 8-sided. That's a very interesting recurring theme. And some of them are very ancient.
We were talking about Black Sea earlier, and Black Sea always perks my ears up. because I did a lot of research on following this tribe of Dan type of thing everywhere. And kind of after I did that, I started to notice Dan or Dawn or Dawn everywhere. So I started to look at like suffix words with Dan and Dawn in it. And Sudan is one of those. The Danuna, Donia, which is like part of like Spain, right across from like Morocco in the Pillar of Hercules area from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic. And then you also have there's another place next to the Black Sea called like, I forget what it's called, but it has Dan in the name. Then you have Denmark, then you have the Tuatha De Danann, and then you have, there's just Dan pops up all over the place. And I was listening to a book about about Egypt and language, and it said that the Tuat or the Duat, the underground, or I guess it has several different meanings, but that also comes into play with the Tuat de Danann. It's the Duat. It's that I can't even remember what Duat means now, damn it. But but it's very interesting.
Well, you know
what's
interesting, you bring,
and in the Black Sea you have 4 rivers of Dan: the Dnieper, the Dniester, the Danube, and the Don. So the Black Sea seems like it was a central area for trading, and which is why you probably have several thousand ships down underneath there, because it was a trading center that was used in Anatolia, and which why Troy was such a big spot, because that controlled the flow of traffic in and out of there. And if you controlled Troy, then you controlled the trade, kind of like what we see nowadays, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you should point that out, because the gap between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea is called the Dardanelles. It's the Dardanelles, which is interesting because but you know, the Danube is an interesting river. Of course, it was the highway of Europe, right? I mean, that was the main trade river. What's interesting though is that Danu, the goddess Danu, which is where the Tuatha De Danann come from. They're the people of the goddess Danu. Danu means river. Yeah. So they sail down the rivers. Tells me, well, what it tells me is that the Tuatha De Danann came up the Danube they came across Europe, and they probably went to Brittany and then went across to Ireland, and they were seafaring people. It is interesting too to note that the 3 main ancient populations of Ireland that we know about, one is the Fomorians, and they are likely the original inhabitants when it was a peninsula before it was an island. And then you have the Firbolg, which means fur bag, and we know that the Firbolg were they were slaves or prisoners of some kind in the country of Thrace, or Thrace, or Thrace, or Thracia, which means gold, by the way, which is right there at the mouth of the Danube, and that they escaped and followed the Danube up across, and then went using some kind of primitive watercraft, got to Ireland. And then, of course, you have the Tuatha De Danann, who came in ships. They came in ships. I mean, it's noted that they came in ships. It's in the stories that they came in ships. And then they got into huge fights with the Fomorians. Now, here's a weird part, though. There are suggestions that the Tuatha De Danann actually showed up before the end of the Ice Age in Ireland, because the land of the Fomorians was the land west of Ireland. which means it would have had to have been exposed. We know people lived out there. We know that the ancient nation of High Brazil was out there.
High Brazil, yeah.
And that when the waters rose, it was called the land beneath the waves, the land of Tirnanog, right? The land that would rise up again one day.
Let me
and the Fomorians.
Huh? Go ahead, finish that.
Well, the Fomorians were from there, and they would come from beneath the sea, and it's interesting. They had darker skin, they had big wild eyes, and they fought ferociously. They were more primitive, right? Well, now they know, based on genetics, DNA research in the British Isles, that there were proto-hominids there. There were hominids of some kind, Cheddar Man in particular, that were swarthier, probably, based on their DNA composition. They had dark hair, and that everything suggests that these other people that showed up, the Tuatha De Danann, were blonde, probably. They were fair of skin, they were light of eye, and they got into some nasty ass fights with the Fomorians. Some of the biggest battles were between them and then the Furbolg as well. And it was all about dominance of that area. And it's interesting because all of it seems to point to a time when there might have been some water like between Ireland and the Isle of Man, that area. There might have been like a channel there, but it really suggests that this was when it was all a peninsula before the water rose. And we know that people were there.
And how do they talk about the Tuatha De Danann? They say like they're high spiritual beings or something like that, right? That they're kind of ghosty or something weird.
They were probably akin to the way that Tolkien described the elves, is my guess. But it's interesting because if you the one thing, okay, so let's just talk about the Sumerians just a second longer, because the Sumerians are a strange group. We know very little about them. They were a very small population that just ended up creating They basically created a civilization that was mainly peopled by Akkadians, who were the kind of Semitic people that already lived there when the Sumerians showed up in the boats. And when they find Sumerian relics, not the tablets, not the writing, but when they find the actual votives, they're very odd because they're almost always carved out of white alabaster. They'll very often have blue lapis lazuli inlaid in the eyes, and their clothing, if you look at the clothing on these figures, it's very similar to Viking clothing, like basic early Viking clothing.
Yeah, I was going to say something about that too, is they talk about them being scaly and stuff, or having scaly skin, or being serpent people. What if they just had chainmail type of garb on and they didn't recognize it because they weren't familiar with it, so they thought they were scaly or people, or maybe they had leather that was like roof tile, had overlapping leather on, and then that looked like scaly, and so they thought they were the serpent people. I wanted to read.
Look at depictions. Look at depictions of Krishna's battle armor.
Yeah, does it look like that? Like samurai style?
It's got that. Well, I mean, it looks very Indian, it's probably gone through stylized morphing, but it's pretty clear that when you hear the stories, the stories of Krishna and Arjuna or Rama, right, from the Ramayana, they're wearing battle armor that would have to be flexible, which means it would have to be articulated, because it's either solid breastplates or it's articulated. If it's articulated, it's usually little bits of metal that are attached to fabric or leather or mesh of some kind. Right. And they would be ferocious. They would be different. They would be taller, probably. They would be of larger build. So one of my questions for the longest time has been who were the Sumerians? Were they the same people that were they the Quetzalcoatl? Were they the Tuatha De Danann? Were they the same people that had wandered around and that they were, golden of hair, fair of skin, blue of eyes, and of course that rubs everybody the wrong way now because of identity politics and blah blah blah. But
this gets fun. This gets fun for me because this is I like to speculate on this idea. But I want to read this of the Duat definition, which is the Duat is the realm of the dead in ancient Egyptian mythology. It has been represented in hieroglyphs as a star in a circle. The god Osiris was believed to be the lord of the underworld. He was the first mummy, as depicted in the Osiris myth, as he personified rebirth and life after death. So if he personifies life after death, it has Duat symbology, and you have the Tuatha De Danann, and then you have these highly spiritual beings that are like almost ghostly in presence and have this ominous presence about them. It kind of fits in very interestingly. So when we get into the Sumerian stuff and who are the Sumerians and who are these, I kind of have this idea of, it's not well thought out. It's just kind of my ramblings and my thoughts, my ideas, is that there was a civilization in the north and there's a civilization in the south. And the civilization in the south was Mu, or Antarctica, which is Terra del Fuego, right? So fire and ice, right? So this kind of goes into that same idea. But
interesting.
But Mu was the Antarctica. And then Mu, because of the tilt, Mu suffered a devastation also. It lost people. So they moved up into Australia, the Philippines, and into what is known as China now. And then moved into Sumeria and those types of areas. And then you have the North Atlanteans that come down from the north. So you have this meeting of the fire and the ice. And this is the story of the Great War. And then, so even in Sumeria, you have Mu in the name, right? You also have the idea of Poseidon creating Atlantis, but then Atlas being the ruler of Atlantis and kicking out Neptune, who was the founder, because Neptune and Atlas started to have disagreements and having fights and wars with each other. And this is why you have the Nuna and the Sumerians fighting against each other, because the Nuna are the sons of Atlas, and the Sumerians are basically the people from Neptune. After he got kicked out, he kind of went into, after the flood happened there, it kind of dispersed and he went up into these northern places, Australia and Philippines and whatnot. And then you have the meeting of the two. So that's why Mu and Atlantis get called like the same thing. It's because they both originated from the same place but dispersed into different directions. And then as civilization got bigger, they ended up meeting in Midgard, the middle ring of Earth, and then having the Great War.
Interesting.
So that's kind of how I've kind of separated it out a little bit, just through languages and whatnot. And I think that the whole Balder story is possibly the Enlil story and Jesus and all of that stuff. Also, it's all because with the Jewish religions is they kind of take part of this one and that one and this one and this one, and then crammed it all together. They forced several gods into one god to make it, omnipotent or whatever, so that for whatever reason, laziness or control, however you want to look at it. I don't want to worship a god of thunder and a god of the sea. I just want both of them to be the same god. Boom. So I kind of they kind of took from different parts, and even in all the characters from the biblical tales come from Sumeria, they come from they come from Egypt, they come from all these other different places, and then that's what forms the narrative for the Bible. So yeah, I think, that's where we get these types of different ideas, and that's why you have the Eastern culture being the spiritual culture, and then you have actually the Northern culture being more of a materialistic culture in this idea, because then you have the two meeting, but then they kind of split in a way, and then they flip, and then the Southern becomes the material and the Northern becomes the high culture. So it's kind of a weird idea, but because it seems like from the North came the technology and the innovation of agriculture, and from these technological advances, masonry and everything. But then you have like this spiritual aspect in the East, right, of all these spiritual woo stuff that we see out here as woo woo or devil worshipping by the Christians, and like yoga and magical practices and plant medicines and stuff like that. But then it's interesting because then you have a flip, and it seems like it flips, and then the spiritual side becomes the materialistic, and then the materialistic becomes the spiritual. So I haven't quite figured it all out in super good smoothness, but that's kind of what I've started to see anyway.
Well, it's interesting too that there are very different models of civilization, and it's kind of, so there's a really, just everything you just said made me think of like 1,500 different things. But one of the things was, of course, Poseidon, which is interesting because there was a whole discussion about Poseidon, who was the patron deity of Troy. I don't know if you know this, but Poseidon was the patron deity of Troy. And what's interesting is Poseidon is, of course, connected to the ocean. Of course, Neptune is the Roman version of Poseidon.
Yeah, same thing.
I mean, basically, the Romans, like I said, were great appropriators. They would say, yes, Zeus, no, Jupiter. We're going to say Jupiter, even though Zeus was there first,
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, it's really interesting. There's almost like this low self-esteem in new civilizations where they say, well, we're going to take everything you have, but we're going to rename it and make it ours because, we're not okay. We want to make sure that you understand that we're running our own show. So it's just very weird. Like Enlil becoming Elil in Babylon too. It's like they go, well, we're going to recognize that Enlil is here and Enlil exists, and we're going to worship Enlil, but we're going to change the name.
And the story of Enlil is very similar to the story of Balder, also in the way that Enki, or I think it's actually Marduk, actually puts a hit out on Enlil and has somebody else actually kill him for him. It's the same with like Loki has somebody else that doesn't really understand what they're doing, right? He has the blind person shoot the arrow, and he guides the arrow into Balder. Whereas like in the Babylonian tale, it's like Marduk hires this guy to kill Enlil for him, and he doesn't really get his hands dirty, but it's this mischievous way also.
Right. Well, exactly. And it's also the necessity. And again, I think that goes into a social order thing to a degree, which is establishing moral behavior from immoral behavior. There has to be an antagonist if you're going to have a protagonist. And it just doesn't work. You can't just have all protagonists because nobody will believe that. That's why the first Matrix failed, because everything was good all the time. You have to have difficulty and challenge and contrast. You have to have contrast.
The Matrix is just women up to their tricks.
Oh man, I could so get into that, but I won't.
The Matrix.
There's so much in the contemporary landscape that we could, so many allegorical stories we could tell.
Yeah, we won't go there. We have a lot of female listeners.
We won't go there.
No, I love women.
Yes, we do. No, and me, don't kill us. Yeah. So me too. But lifelong experience of shall we say, interrelating with women has developed perspectives. That I'm going to leave that there.
Yeah.
Because there are certain consistencies that seem to be even recorded in the myths. Freya,
they would say the same about
as
us,
a character. Oh, yeah. Of course. Well, I mean, the truth is, we all do seem to have the same fundamental biological construct, which is that there are certain ways that we just have developed biologically to be. And it tends to create certain base reactions and behaviors that are consistent. I'm going to leave that right there.
I think that is very, very well said. And that goes for both sexes or all sexes, however you guys want to take that.
That's what I'm saying. No, I was talking about, yeah. I was trying to be a politician there where I said everything without saying.
Solid.
Don't kill me. So what was I going to say about what?
Vote for Hraefn.
Vote for me. That's right. No, don't. Because the last thing I'd actually want to be is in charge. It's very funny. Anytime I hear a person that goes, I want to be a president one day, I go, why?
I don't. Yeah. No, you don't.
Why would you want to be the president? It's like, I want to be the king of the world. Why? Do you see what happens to kings of the world? Anyway. Yeah. They have no life.
When you're on top of the mountain, everybody wants to take you down from the top of the mountain.
That's right. What do they say? It's I can't remember now. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So going back to what we were talking about before we got caught up in that.
Yeah, Sumerian, Atlantis, Mu, civilizations.
Well, yeah, but no, I was saying what was interesting. Well, Poseidon. That's what I was saying. So we tend to think of Poseidon and we associate Poseidon with the ocean, right? He's the god of the sea, but he was also the god of both horses and earthquakes, which is one of the reasons they suspect that he was the patron deity of Troy, because that region is frequently racked with earthquakes, and they were famous. In fact, that area of the world is still famous for breeding some of the best horses in the world, like the greatest.
Can I say, if you have like an army of people riding horses, you're going to be able to hear that and feel that as like the earth trembling beneath your feet if they're coming for you, so that whole earthquake thing could not necessarily be the earth shaking, but actually be the earth shaking because of the stampede of the horses and that army coming towards you. I'm just throwing that out there.
And by the way, that's also the sixth rune.
The horse?
The sixth rune in the strand is Redo, which is the sound. It's a sound of many horses running. That's what that rune means.
Redo.
And it's like, riding a horse, but the sound of many horses running. And it's got a parallel to thunder. Earthquakes. It's also got a parallel to thunder and lightning. Right?
Makes sense.
And it's the fifth rune in the six runes, which make up the first 6 runes of every single rune strand. So there's something about that power. And it's funny because before right now, I've never thought about the earthquake connection. I've always thought about it in terms of thunder, because thunder and storm, because of lightning and fire, because the next rune is fire. So the place I was operating from for a long time, and I still am, is that fire was the gift of the gods, right?
Sort of.
And it's interesting because the rune, well, no, it was the gift of the gods because whether it's Prometheus stealing the fire and bringing it to people, whether it's Raven stealing the fire from his uncle.
It was stolen from the
fire
gods,
was
not given by the gods.
But it was stolen because, now let me just break this into a direct activity. Lightning hits a tree, lights it on fire. Now, most of those burn out, or they start forest fires that burn out. But a wily human says, I can capture a little bit of that and keep it going. Therefore, I have in fact captured the gift of the gods, which is the sixth rune, which is fire. And what is that? Fire, which is kaun or kain, depending on, kaunas, kain, kin, is all related root to the word kyn, and kyn is kindling, kinter, kint, kind. It all relates to family, hearth, and home. All of it does. And so what it is that once you've captured the fire, that becomes the ability to build a tribe or a band around, right? You have a hearth. You're welcome at my fire. Like the hospitality, all these things that are core human things about how you stay alive.
That's the seventh one?
That's the sixth rune.
Oh, that's the sixth?
Is six. And the first six are the only ones that are always consistent in terms of order. Right? It's F-U-T-H, and K. So it's Futhar.
Can we go through how many runes are there total?
The problem with the runes is that there are culturally they change. There have been rune strings that are as few as 16. There have been times when it's been more. The runes, the 16 are the twig runes, and they're very old and they're very limited. Like they weren't used. They were used for a short period of time, and they're almost like it's possible that they were just one person's idea, that their own thing that they came up with, that just happened to get preserved. But the point is that the average strand is 24.
Okay, so
the average strand.
The sixth is fire, hearth and home, kinder.
Kinter, so it's children, kinder, like kindling.
That's the sixth. Okay.
All the root words of that are there.
And the fifth one was Rodan,
Rodan, and then there's Godzilla, and then I'm kidding.
What is it?
There's Mothra. It's the word. Our word raid actually comes from this word. It's redo, and it's
Rado,
and it's and it basically is it's like a herd of horses, but it's the sound of many horses.
Okay.
Running. So it's both things together, which is interesting because it ties it into that whole Poseidon kind of idea, which is the earthquake and that there was a connection between the horses. Which is interesting to think. This is just a weird hypothetical thing. Imagine if the same cultural ideas had happened in North America, we wouldn't be associated with horses. It'd be probably with bison.
Oh yeah.
Because of the huge herds of bison, right? But the point of that story was, I just when you said that you were talking about Poseidon. And I remembered the horse thing, and I was like, I'm going to have to go back and look at the horse rune itself, because there is a horse rune.
That's also
Equaz.
The horse is also one of the flags of the tribe of Dan, and it has a relation to Atlantis, and then also back to Odin.
Which, yeah, and what's interesting about Odin? I'm even going to go out on a leap here. I'm going to make a big leap. And suggest that Odin is a post-cataclysm deity that replaced a pre-cataclysm deity with the same qualities, but that was was either forgotten or wiped out or like was maybe worshipped, but it was only the remnants, and it was someone. I think a lot of the Norse deities, and this may be true of other systems too, polytheism is a strange thing because on one hand, polytheism does sort of suggest that there are multiple forces in the world and that people recognized multiple forces in the world, right? That there was rivers and there were mountains and there were animals and there were different things, and that each one of those had its own. I mean, there's a certain logic to that, right? Mm-hmm. You know, there's a goddess of the grain. Why? Because you want to worship her. Why? Because you want grain, because you don't want to starve. Okay, you want the crop to work. And there's a certain basic mechanical logic to that. But what if that's not what's going on at all? What if what's going on is that a lot of these deities were simply the people that had that knowledge who survived the cataclysm, who were then kind of like, to put it in a Catholic context, they were canonized, right? Afterwards, you know, maybe Wotan was in fact just happened to be the dude that had enough knowledge and leadership skills and charisma to pull the shit together afterwards and said, okay, we're going to start over and we're going to do this. And he was the leader. And he became the embodiment, as we see in the Chinese emperor and as we see in the pharaohs and we see in others, that they are the avatar. That's the one thing I love about Hinduism is I think that Hinduism in many ways has preserved the most information pre-cataclysm, especially the mechanics of their hierarchies and their structures and their worship and their temples, because you don't have to look very far to go Vishnu, Shiva, Brahma, and go, and because Shiva is the creator destroyer, the dancer creator destroyer, right? And then you've got Vishnu, who's the sustainer, and then you have Brahma, who's the father. Well, that's An, Enlil, and Enki. It's literally the exact same triad, but translated into another part of the world, which my argument would be that it's very possible. Now, here's the thing. This is where we get into a tricky area that could get me in a lot of trouble, but fuck it, I don't care. Come and get me. And that is this. There is a lot of evidence to suggest that the Indian civilization, not the Indians all as a whole, but the Indian civilization is not from India. The people who actually established the culture of India are not from India. There was the Indian subcontinent. It was there. There were people who lived there that were living in the forest and were fairly primitive, who then another group of people showed up and civilized them and brought with them a system.
This kind of gets into the Kumari Kandam idea of a civilization being between Africa and Australia and China, and then a flood happening and them all going into the next closest, civil land area, which was that area of India. And same with the Philippines going into China, and saying this whole idea of the Mu civilization from the Pacific going into that, being forced into that area because they lost their homes.
And it is interesting to note that we know that there were two principal ethnic groups amongst the Sumerians. Apart from the Akkadians, there were a group that inhabited the north, which were called the Blackheads. And we know they were called the Blackheads. And we know that there was a group that inhabited the southern of this, because you realize Samaria is not a place. Samaria is a system of city-states. There was Sumer, there was there was Uruk, there was Nineveh, There were these different cities that were all generally culturally related, but they were in a very vulnerable place. Right. Although Egypt seemed to become ultimately more unified in the long run.
But there was an upper and lower at one point before they became unified.
Right. There was the upper and lower. And then, of course, there came a point when they were unified. And then you see the crowns of upper and lower as represented on the pharaohs together jointly after that point. So the thing about the Sumerians is we know that some of them had black hair because that's recorded. We also know that some of them had golden hair, which is interesting to note. So there were golden-haired Sumerians and black-haired Sumerians. And the question is, when the Akkadians under Sargon, when they finally invaded and conquered Samaria, when Sargon did, we know that the Sumerians fled. There were people who fled. And it's interesting because when you go into ancient Armenia before the Turkic invasions, when the ancient Armenians actually had a lot in common with the Sumerians. There were a lot of things, but they were clearly a much smaller, diminished tribal culture in the mountains, and they were fierce warriors. And then all of a sudden, you've got, another group of people, the Laplanders up in Finland, the Sami, who many of them, they don't know where they came from. These are people that ethnically, they do not know where they came from. It is unclear. They are not related to the Scandinavians. They are clearly Caucasian, but they are not of the same ethnic stock. They speak a different language. They've always spoken a different language, and there are remnants of other places in the world. There are remnants in their language of other places in the world. So they're a very weird anomaly. And it's interesting because this is something I was thinking about too. Are you familiar with Indra and Agni?
No.
So Indra and Agni feature pretty prominently in the Rig Veda, which is the oldest, of those texts. And it's interesting how they had battles. In fact, the story of Manu, who was the one that supposedly built the boat in the Hindu mythology, is related to the story of Indra and Agni. And there are suggestions that the Zoroastrian religion had, to a degree, some of its origins in the Rig Veda and in the Indra and Agni story. And I was thinking about this the other day. I said, especially if I had the ability to sit down with you and Dan, or you and Roman in person, like we could sit down and I could take you through everything with the runes. It's kind of hard to do this way, but I could do it if I was in your presence, right? Because I could point things and draw things. It's interesting that the rune for fire, there seems to be this bisection, this vertical bisection in this grid. And there seems to be a very prominently east or right side to it and a west or left side to it. And the rune characters themselves predominantly face the east. They're either centralized or they're east. But there are a few that are west, and fire is one of them, oddly enough. That goes Y. Like this. Like the letter Y?
Yeah, it has like this and it splits, right? But then sometimes it's tilted, so it looks more like the Y shape.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I got you. Yeah. And there are a few runes that are on both sides. The Alcus rune is a good example. There are a couple that are double stave runes that are on both sides of that meridian as well. But the point is that the fire rune is on the left side. It's on the west side, which suggests that it's cut off from the east side. The east side is where the gods are, it's where the giants are, it's where the Vanir are. All of that is on the east side. But the west side is where fire, and it's only a little thing, and it's only by itself, and it's not connected to anything else. I think that's a symbol of the captured fire. I think that's why it's isolated. It's saying now the fire is in the world. See, everything else takes it outside of Midgard. This says it's only in Midgard. Fire is in Midgard. Well, think about this. What is one of the central points, the central Ahura Mazda, right? The Persian religion, Ahura Mazda, one of the central whole worship temple things that the Zoroastrians do is they have an eternal flame. Many of those ancient temples in that part of the world have fires that have been burning uninterrupted since the Middle Ages or earlier. They've literally kept the same fire going.
And I went, Olympic torch.
Yes, the eternal flame. And we have this thing about the eternal flame, the flame that burns without ending, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's, I think, what is it? Supposedly there's an eternal flame over JFK's grave. They have an eternal flame that burns forever, until the gas gets shut off. It's definitely a petroleum era memorial, because it'll be very hard to keep it going. There isn't natural gas to keep it going. But anyway, the point is that you have the captured fire, and I was like, that is really interesting. It's made me, man, this whole horse and earthquake thing is just like it's rattling around in this part of my brain right now. It's just going, that's really fascinating. But one thing I was going to say too about about Indian mythology, and it kind of goes back to what you were alluding to with the Tuatha De Danann, even with Quetzalcoatl, with Viracocha, with all of these. There's an interesting connection to my blue friends. And that is that, first of all, a lot of the Hindu deities are blue.
Yep.
A number of them are blue, especially avatars of Vishnu. Benevolent Vishnu, blue, right? And I thought of what you were saying about the Tuatha De Danann. They were described as ethereal or almost spiritual, right?
Yeah.
But these beings, my beings, when they showed up to me, they changed form 3 times in the course of my first experience with them, or second experience with them. So maybe we're all talking about the same beings.
Yeah.
They're beings that can change their appearance, but they do appear to be blue.
Yeah.
You're right. So maybe that's not an accident, and maybe they aren't blue like Krishna was blue, but Krishna also had a thing for the young women that herded goats in the pasture. He had quite a thing for them, actually. He had quite a party, apparently, on one night. Anyway, but he'd go out there, the what are they called? The guppies.
I don't know.
The Gupties. Anyway, but the point is that there is also this connection between the blue beings and the dissemination of information. They are carriers of culture.
If you think about colors, again, back to colors, the blue would be almost be like the 6th chakra, right? Before purple, before the crown.
The throat chakra is
the throat chakra.
The color, blue, which is communication. It's all about communication.
The 5th one.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's actually a conclusion that not a conclusion. It's something that I've been wondering about. Is the reason they appeared that color to me is because they were communicating. That's why they were that color.
And you said that they have the most detailed stories too of ongoings. So maybe that's another connection too. The fact that they have so many stories about these other times, that they were the communicators, and that's why they're represented as blue, and they're ethereal, or the higher vibration in a way. So because most of the time we see everything as lower chakra, red, as bad, and then green is like the heartland, that's earth, so they're above the earth. Yeah.
Yep. Well, and what's interesting, if you even go to Egypt, Osiris is often depicted as blue-green.
Yeah, he's blue or green
in color.
Yeah.
Blue or green. And they say, oh, it's the color of the dead. I go, no. It's a color of what? It's a color of communication. It's a color of carrier of information, which of course, and then of course the duat is often, when it's painted, is painted as a blue, as an almost an azure or cerulean blue in the monuments. So
there you go.
And it's interesting too.
That's Azul, and we know what Az is, right? Because you talked about that too.
Yep, Azur, the Azur. Well, that's sky. It comes back to the sky over and over again, which is interesting. Right. That they come from that. And this is something else that I find fascinating. Now, again, I can make that pragmatic leap and say, of course, when you are a human experiencing things on the planet, the sky is one of the most bizarre, like if you didn't know anything that was going on, all you saw was the sky change, things move through the sky, clouds move through the sky. There were stars, there are moons, there are comets, there are meteors. Things fall from the sky, and the sky is a great mystery. I can see why, like I said, speaking very strictly in a pragmatic way, why it would end up having this great significance. But there's the other part of me that also says, okay, but how did teachers come from the sky? How did teachers come from the sky? How did, what is it? What does Anunnaki mean?
Those who came
that from, word. What?
Those who came down.
Those who came down. So clearly, there is more. I thought it's interesting too that the Egyptians viewed meteors as the semen of the gods. I always found that's just been a fascinating idea, that they were recognizing things falling from the sky as seeds, basically.
Yeah, seeds. Yeah, that's what I think. Earth is an egg, and the comets are seeds, sperm. Cosmic sperm,
and it kind of makes you go, makes you really not want to be outside when that's going on. So, can I tell you an unrelated piece of trivia that was related to that, but has nothing to do with that? Really quick.
Yeah, one more thing, because we've been going on 3 hours and 15 minutes, and
jeez, okay,
need to wrap it up.
Well, I'll make this quick. It was just a funny thing. So, no, it's about fake eyelashes. Okay. So I read this whole thing about fake eyelashes, why women wear fake eyelashes and where that came from. Mm-hmm. And what that is that there was a woman who ran a brothel who wanted to come up with a way for women to not get jizz in their eyes. So she came up with fake eyelashes to catch it. So the reason that makes me laugh is it makes me look at every single woman now that wears fake eyelashes. I go, yeah, I know why you're doing it. But apparently it's a true story. That's why she came up with them. It was a way to stop it from getting in their eyes. I think she was French, leave it to the French.
Oh, man. White flags.
But anyway, yeah. So anyway, I don't know if we actually went everywhere we wanted to go. It's always interesting to have Roman here too, because he has other thought processes. But generally speaking, I'll make a final summation statement, and that is that I do believe that there was a civilization during the Ice Age.
Yeah.
I believe that all we're ever going to have, unless we could drain the oceans, is a lot of conjecture about it. It's all trying to piece it together from what we have, what's around and what we find, and what has been preserved through folklore, among other things. But it's pretty evident that it was there. It was pretty evident that it was fairly sophisticated, because there's just too much architecture, from the megalithic cultures to Peru, to Egypt, actually even to aspects of China, India. There's just too much information out there that says that we are standing on the foundations of giants, and that we are, in fact, for all of our high technology now, we quite possibly are some of the dumbest people that have ever existed on the planet. We're not really that bright, and all we've been doing for the last 10,000 years is trying to figure out how to bring civilization back to what it was, without even knowing that that's what we're doing, or really even knowing what the goals or because it was so completely destroyed. It was so completely wiped out that this is all just a pantomime. We are literally trying to resurrect a ghost, and we've been trying to do that for thousands of years. And we've gotten kind of to a point. But if you notice something, it's all kind of soulless now. There is this. I look out and I go, it's a facade. It's a facade of a facade. The truth is,
it's a facade of 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 a facade.
Exactly. I mean, it's almost Blavatskyan. It's like what race age are we in? And the thing is, I there are a lot of things that she says that I kind of go, okay, yeah, but this is Madame Blavatsky, Theosophy. There's a lot that she kind of goes on about that I go, okay, but I think there are truths in what she saw and what she had to say and what she found. I think there are truths in it. And here's the truth. This is what I think is the truth. I think the memory of all of this is buried inside of us. I think we carry this memory in our subconscious, in our DNA, in our family lines. And I think that what happens is that from time to time it comes out, and there are people who are more aware of that voice than others. And when I be aware, I mean, we can hear a voice. There's just something that doesn't make sense. We ask questions, which can get you crucified or burned or ripped apart or whatever.
I think it's true of all life. I mean, even if you look at your own life cycle, even in as old as you are, or as old as I am, what do we still do? We still try to repeat our earliest history that we recall. We still think we're that same teenage kid or same 20-year-old or whatever, and we still try, some even in their adulthood, try to live out those same things through that, or they relive the trauma that had happened in those times. So I think in a way we're kind of in our late stages of humanity, not really late, but middle-aged, and we're trying to relive what once happened in our past, and not even recognize it or realize it. We need to see a ancient therapist.
That's perfect.
That's what we are. We're rising from the ashes, and we're your ancient therapy.
I think that's fantastic. I think you're absolutely right. And in fact, honestly, isn't that what these ancient stories are?
Yeah.
They are the ancient therapists. That's what they are.
They're to help you
Well,
you get along.
Well, I appreciate the conversation as always, Dan. It's fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, Hraefn.
I learn a little more about you every time we talk. Learn more things. I love your exploration of your name. I think that's just marvelous.
Yeah, Dan,
regardless,
the tribe of Dan and the Anunnaki. Put it together, Dan Anunnaki.
Yep. Dan Anunnaki. I love it.
That's
well, and here I am stealing shit from the gods and bringing it down. That's what I do. You do your thing, I do mine. Please give my regards to Roman and thank you so much for the time, and it's always a pleasure.
All right. Yeah, thank you, man. I appreciate your time also, and it was great to have a super long conversation. They don't happen too often, especially one-on-ones, because I'm usually with Roman. So he always takes questions from me or goes on different tangents, and I don't get to stay on the one thing. But I love him anyway. Love you, Roman. Love you, Fire Tribe. If you're not down with that, wake up.
Everything exists within our atmosphere, then the memory remains. The memories remain. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. Therefore, the past is there to be discovered. To discover who we truly are. We're just looking for answers to see if this is all just a simulation. And I'm not sure anymore. Life does just seem to be a blur anymore. Will we rise from the ashes?
Wake up.